Okay, welcome. My name is Kristen Aro, co-chair of the Warner's Pond Task Force, and I'm calling this public meeting to order at 6 p.m. Now I'll take a roll call of task force members present. I think I'm just going to read the names this time.
Okay.
Vicky Alani, present. Paul Bone,
Present.
Malcolm Bryant,
Present.
Ann Clifford,
Present.
Jeff Collins,
Present.
Bruce Curlis. Okay, Kristen Aro, present. Keith Hannon,
Here.
Mark Howell,
Here.
Delia Kay and
Here.
Bert. Bill Kameza,
Yep, here.
Liz Morrison Howe.
Yep.
David Owen. Sammy.
Yep.
Jeff Quick.
Jeff is online.
I
right?
thought
I thought so too.
Jeff, are you with us?
Jeff on,
He is on?
well, there's somebody that's
You-
identified as Jeff, so we. It's an assumption, it doesn't say quick.
No.
All right, and Sven Weber.
Yeah.
Okay, so tonight our main goals are to achieve as much alignment as we can to the overall framework for the task force recommendations. We would like to vote to approve the overall framework and so for the written form will be finished at the next meeting, I presume. So you can see our agenda here on the slide. We will open the meeting, we have opened the meeting to the public. And we will have, tonight, we will not have public comments at the beginning of the meeting, but we will have them at the end of the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and a video link will be posted to the task force website within a few days. So now the minutes of the April 16, 2025 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the April 16, 2025 minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Keith, thank you. Do we have a second?
Sure.
A second from Mark. Thank you very much. So then all those in favor, we'll go through the list again. Vicky Alani. Paul Bone,
Aye.
that means you approve, right?
Aye. AYE. Is that AYE?
Yeah, anyway.
Yes.
Malcolm Bryant,
Aye.
Jeff Collins.
Aye.
Kristen Aro, aye. Keith Hannon,
Aye.
Mark Howell,
Aye.
Bill Kameza.
Yes.
Liz Morrison Howe.
Aye.
And Sven Weber.
Aye.
Okay, very good. So the minutes are approved as written for April 16, 2025. Thank you very much. Toby.
David Owen coming in.
Oh, good.
Great. David's online.
Good.
Okay.
It's all the voting members.
Yep.
David Owen. Okay, so we do have all the voting members here.
Yeah, great.
Fantastic. So, all right, folks, here we are. This is like the home stretch of the marathon. We're on, mile, 24 or something, right? Coming into the end. So, it's been a long road, but, here we are. We're hoping to really get clarity in this meeting on what is our recommendation gonna look like. So as Chris mentioned, we hope that by the end of today, we can have a vote on what we plan to recommend. We hope that we can get as much consensus as absolutely possible. Our goal is always is to get everyone at least living with what we can come up with. And we'll see how much towards that we can get. And we'll write it up and then the next meeting, we'll have a chance to kind of fine tune it. And give that absolute final approval at that meeting. One thing we do just want to clarify for everyone, this is going to be Paul's last meeting. He is moving on to bigger and better things. Is it the
We're select-
yeah,
Yeah.
We're select-
Yeah.
select board, yeah,
Thank you.
select board, yeah.
select-
So-
yeah.
Yeah.
I just make a comment that that's basically because of the technicalities of the schedule and the and the way the responsibilities of the select board work. Restrictions on being a member of another committee without actually being assigned to that membership as a select board member. So it's certainly no reflection on Paul in any way. But I think it's a vote of confidence that the community elected him to serve out that, working with him on the board.
And you had asked whether I could delay being sworn in,
Right,
but the bylaw says no.
Yeah.
right,
And so it has to be after, right at or after town meeting, so
yeah.
my hands are tied.
There's also kind of a practical, some people may be aware of the fact that we're sending a delegation from the town to Japan this fall, almost immediately after the town meeting, and 2 sitting members of the select board are going to that. And so, should we need to have a meeting of the select board during the time when they're out of the country, we'd actually need Paul for a quorum as well, so.
You
I
need.
guess he's not going.
I thought you were going to Japan.
Wait, I'm just a pretty core.
Yeah, Wendy and Mary are both traveling on behalf of the town and we appreciate it and, so. That's also not the primary reason, but one consideration around delay.
Feeling used?
Enough of that, on to mental what is bond.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So one just kind of point of order for all of us to consider is, we will not have Paul at our next meeting. We're hopeful that we can potentially get all the other voting members, but it's not guaranteed at this point, in terms of schedules or some unpredictability. So it's another reason why we really want to see, can we get as much alignment and kind of clarity on a vote as possible, so we can get, we have all the voting task force members here today, right? So we want to take advantage of that as much as we can. So you can see in the agenda on there, and just to kind of run through that, we want to spend some time at the outset just refreshing everyone's memory, giving a little bit of a report back to you all on the survey responses. We'll also share the results from the most recent second survey that we sent around, just so everyone kind of has that top of mind, right? We hope that that was good information for you all in terms of thinking about what might be possible, where we can go as a task force. And so we want to have a chance to share that and give people an opportunity to talk about it, discuss it, ask each other questions, just clarify where you all are coming from. So we can then think together about what that final recommendation could look like. So we'll spend some time just, we'll share the survey responses. I'm going to do that in a minute. You can stop me at any time, ask questions, have a discussion about those, and then move in, we hope in about 45 minutes or so, towards actually moving to see how far we can get aligned on a specific recommendation. And so we'll spend the latter half or 2/3 of the meeting trying to build that out, refine it, determine how much consensus we can build as a group. Sound good to everyone? All right. So I will go ahead and get started. And again, I'm just going to share, this is very similar to the facilitator summary that I sent around, just to refresh everyone's memory again. Stop me at any time. And at the end of this very brief slide presentation, we'll have a discussion on where y'all were coming from. You'll have a chance to share a little more about your thinking, ask others as well. Chris, did you want to chime in on something? Okay, just giving me a curious look. All right. So in terms of the survey responses, we did get all 11 voting task force members to respond, which is great. And I think for all of you who hopefully reviewed all of those, they're very substantive, thoughtful responses. So well done to all of you. None of the non-voting members chose to respond, which I think we can understand potentially why they didn't. In terms of the criteria weights, so the first question just asked you, how do you rate the 5 main criteria that we came up with? Overall, you all were thinking pretty differently about the criteria, was our takeaway. There were a wide range of perspectives, some very different rationales. We did see, on average, a little bit higher ratings for ecological sustainability and fiscal sustainability, suggesting that those are weighing particularly heavy, at least for some of you. And then on the flip side, mobility and accessibility was weighted a little bit lower, and there were some comments surrounding, well, this is kind of maybe covered already by some of the other criteria, or is just less resonant for me. So here just is the actual average, or the actual averages that you can see, right? So everything is between a 2 and a 4, right? But, or excuse me, almost between a 2 and a 4. You have a little bit below 2 for mobility and accessibility, almost a 4 for ecological sustainability, right? 3.5 or so for fiscal sustainability. So those are the averages on our criteria. And then in terms of the proposals themselves, so also a wide range, not just in the ratings that people offered, but the explanations. Right? People were thinking very differently about the 5 different alternatives, so the 3 dredging plus the 2 others. There were not very many areas of clear alignment on how people were thinking about these proposals. I would just observe as an outsider, right? And in addition, there was no single proposal that really stood out as like, this one is way higher rated than some of the others. But, you know, you can see here, so this is a little bit of a heat map, or it is a heat map that kind of has the higher scores colored green and the lower scores colored red. So you can see, right, for example, the new recurring management plan is sort of in the middle on a lot of the ratings, right? Slightly lower on ecological sustainability, highest on fiscal sustainability. Dam removal, right, did quite well on ecological sustainability, but on average lower for some of the others. The base dredging plan was sort of average or slightly lower on a number of these. The 50,000 scored better on the history and character and livability and values, and the 3rd largest dredging, right, scored very highly on those 2, but then was dinged pretty substantially on the fiscal sustainability piece. So again, these are averages, they don't reflect any individual score, those were very different, but this is just where things came out overall. And of course, I think goes without saying, we're not obligated to follow these weightings, they're not weighted by criteria or anything, it's just the average. Then,
Sorry.
yeah, please go ahead.
These
Yeah.
are the average of the points, or did you use the weights person used as a weighted average?
Did not do that. I did not just average the points
So you-
themselves. Yes. Did not do
Okay,
a
so
weighted
the
average.
weighting
No, wait.
No
had
weighting,
no influence in any of it. So
No.
this is
not
equal
on
weighting.
this chart, right?
Okay.
Not on this chart. That's correct. Right, so if you want, if someone is interested in figuring that out, like weighting, multiplying each person's score times their
Well,
weight,
this-
we could certainly do that, but that's not what this is.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that would have been valuable information
Yes.
to present
Okay.
here,
Yeah.
because these are meaningless without that weighting.
Okay.
To be honest, you know.
I wouldn't say they're meaningless, Malcolm. I would say it's an average that we can at least look at,
No,
right?
Yeah.
You've ignored the whole of the first part of the survey and simply done a straight average. Therefore,
do
it
you
doesn't
think-
reflect the opinions of the.
Let me try something. Let me ask this question. Maybe I'll get this right. Maybe I won't. Do you think we would agree on the weighting of these individual things? No, we won't, would we? Would we all agree on the weighting?
No, you don't agree.
We don't.
Yeah.
So that's already gonna bias the
I'm
outcome.
not talking about bias, I'm talking
No, the
about leaving
individual.
out half the
Oh,
data.
I see. Okay. All right, I get it.
So one thing just for your information, I did, just because I was interested,
Okay,
go back and just do some kind of multiplication weighting exercise of these by the average weighting. And did that, and it was made almost no difference.
The average doesn't make a difference, but the
Yeah.
difference makes it if you do
Right.
it properly on the line by line.
Right, so you're suggesting, Sven, let's do
Now,
each individual and
I
then.
just wanted
Yeah.
to clarify the
Yeah,
facts.
yeah,
I think I was in the beginning of this task was very clear that I don't like weighting in the first place because everyone weights according to their bias,
exactly,
yeah.
and then you're getting just useless data.
right.
But I just want to make clear is we all did the exercise and put it in the trash can. That's what he did.
Well,
In this chart.
yeah, in this chart, right, in this
Right.
chart, right, this chart does not you know, you all, it's up to you how you want to
Right.
deal with those weights. Right, I think for purposes of looking at the group, people did not agree on the weights, right? All right, any other questions on this before I move on to the what it is, what it isn't? Okay. Great. All right, so then there was this question around, but we asked you to rank the order of the different proposals. And so what we saw in that was overall, right, the recurring management proposal had a number of high ratings. It was on average the highest rated proposal. A number of people in the rationales suggested that it was, you know, for them, a pathway towards consensus. They liked the fact that it could still allow for future dredging or dam removal, so those are not ruled out. That said, there were a couple of members who really had some strong skepticism about recurring management, feeling like it was very unlikely to be successful and that they hoped that this group could come up with something more ambitious. In terms of dam removal, there was a very strong divide. I think probably not surprising to all of you having gone through this process. A very wide range of perspectives on the impact. Folks who were particularly concerned about dam removal, one of the main things they cited was the irreversibility of it. On dredging, very similar. Also strong divide in the group. Interestingly, the people who kind of most preferred dredging or kind of indicated or scored dredging very highly, right, when they were doing their ratings, they tended to prefer recurring management in terms of what they thought the task force should recommend, even if they scored dredging higher. I think the main rationale, folks who did this could correct me, but they saw this as a way to actually get everyone on board, and they recognized any dredging wasn't going to be possible.
Yeah, and I can add a little to that. I think part of that, because I think I was one of those
Mhm.
people, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but I think one of the things we were tasked with, and so it was not easy, but something we had to take to heart was what we were coming into with this meeting, which was you were supposed to put everything you thought was gonna happen aside and come in with consensus in your heart. And so it's like, even if I loved dredging, I was not supposed to come in saying, die on the sword of dredging. I was supposed to come in with something that I felt like, having heard everything and heard everyone, was going to be the most likely to get everyone on board. So I was taking that direction.
Yeah.
And so that's why, you know,
Yeah.
you're saying people who liked dredging said recurring management first. It's because it was like, well, the likelihood that we're gonna dredge is very low, given everything I've heard for the last year and a half. And so really, the most likelihood is that we were all gonna get on board with pond management. So it's like, yes, I might still like dredging, but I'm going to vote for pond management first.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
Yes, let's go to Sven then Paul. Yeah.
On the dam removal, I think there was some comments, there seemed to be uncertainty on the outcome, not just irreversibility, but would it work? What is it gonna look like? You know, we
Mhm.
just didn't know. It was a bit of a, you know, based on modeling. I'm just wondering how much that weighed on people's minds. When you dredge, there's a kind of a certainty, you know, it's happening. With the management, yeah, we know, the uncertainty, the dam removal, just wondering, because I saw some comments that decrease people's enthusiasm for it, or
Or if it
Just a
decreased,
quick
or
question.
certainly,
I don't know.
certainly from my perspective, it didn't help the situation.
yeah,
I mean, I don't think that dam removal is the way to go, but the uncertainty of it all really solidified it more so for me.
Yeah, I think that's a shame that, you know, with dredging, we don't even know where the dredged areas would be, right? That was in the proposal. Short-term management, we have reports that the 2012 watershed management plan saying none of that stuff will work. So that's not certain.
that's true, it's
And
uncertainty.
we had, after much back and forth and thoughtful input from our working group and the small group, we budgeted quite healthy budget for engineering the stream channel to achieve our recreational goals. And so I don't think
that proposal had any more uncertainty than the.
So you're saying there's equal amounts of uncertainty,
I'd say there was more certain.
more, that was more
than
certain.
down.
Okay, I mean, that's fair.
It's fine, folks may not prefer that, but I question whether.
Yeah.
So in your observation going through this, and I haven't done the analysis here on the Excel sheet, but we are kind of, in how we were seated, we were interestingly seated by representing different groups. We have two clearly at-large members. So I think for me, somewhere in this discussion, if they both feel comfortable, I feel like at-large members, because they might have less of a conflict of interest or a representation of a committee or a group, represent potentially a neutral viewpoint that can give us guidance. The other thinking is in groups like that where we know we had to weigh conflicts of interest. What about the disinterested members? If you make analysis about this, is there a different picture, or is it just mirroring the whole? Yeah, is there a difference when you start to look at these different groups? But again, this is hot topic and it's dangerous territory. I acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But therefore I was hoping at least the moderator, without kind of doing things when they look at the analysis, to say, okay, if you look at this, do we see patterns differently than just what we see as a whole group? So that might be something of interest, but me personally, the two members at large weigh a lot for me in how I look at this.
Yeah, I'd be concerned about trying now, having been together for a year and a half, about putting one person's vote above another person's vote, or weighting now votes against each other. I think we all said we're coming in as equal members and we acted equally together. We even did an analysis of people who lived within 2,500 feet of the pond versus not, and all that kind of stuff. So we've kind of come together tonight. We're supposed to be one vote, one person, one vote, right? No. Anything different than that? I think, I don't know, Toby, if that.
Well,
Goes
our
differently than
decision
that.
will treat all of you equally, right? In terms of what is weighing on Sven's mind, I think that's Sven's mind.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Other observations before I move on, and either a couple more here to share. Okay, so I'll keep going. One thing just to name, I thought was interesting. There were actually a wide range of perspectives on the most preferred dredge size, including among people who actually were strong supporters of dredging. So that was interesting to me to observe. And there's more detail in there on it, obviously. So here is sort of the score of these. So the average score, this kind of subtracts it from 5, so the higher is better here, right? Like a 1 is a 4 or 5. But you can see recurring management is just above 4, right? Interestingly, dam removal and the highest dredge alternative were exactly tied. Yeah.
The highest dredge
So
is
the
50,000.
50,000, the median with the highest
yeah.
scoring dredge
Oh,
alternative were
I see
exactly
where,
tied
I see.
at 2.91, and then slightly lower for the other two dredging alternatives.
But again, a question here.
Yeah.
In that vote, I think there are different comments, and is the recurring management plan the final solution? Or is it the interim solution? There are two completely different concepts behind that.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, Sven, and I think that is going to could probably be something we are going to discuss when we get to what the recommendation will look like, right? And it was the recurring management proposal that we were asking people to vote on, and I don't think it specified that, right? And unless I'm
In the
mistaken.
comments, there were a lot of comments about.
Yes.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
So didn't the recurring management proposal have a timing It is,
Yeah, yes,
Well, yes,
we suggested 5 years
at a minimum.
at a minimum. And the notion is, we can't decide what's gonna happen. We're not gonna say it's an interim because we don't know. If we're 5 years and we have a successful recurring management plan, we're not gonna turn around and say, well, we're gonna drop that off now and we're gonna go ahead and have dredging or dam removal. If it's not successful, at least in terms of what we believe it's a success, then we'll have to look at the other two options again. So in that sense, the question is not really whether it's an interim plan or not. It's a plan to cover for the next 5 years, with the notion that if it's not successful, then we'll have to look at some other alternatives.
But that makes it an interim plan.
Not
Well,
quite,
just-
no, it doesn't,
just-
because what if it's successful? After 5 years, we see a significant,
Continues.
drop in the
I
invasives.
agree with that, but you're saying after 5 years, there's a decision.
Well, no, actually, what I'm suggesting is
So
there's gonna be, no. I'm suggesting we would keep up, we would probably modify events every year to get to that 5th year, point.
Yeah.
But there would be a continual modification. But after 5 years, I think we can say whether or not certain things have worked or not worked.
I think the word is dynamic rather.
Yeah, I
than
think that's it.
interim.
I wouldn't say interim, because it sounds like it's short term. I wouldn't say necessarily it's a short term solution. It may be the long term solution. The reason why I suggested, one more thing, Mark.
Sure.
I suggested to you, I hope you read this, then, the management plan from Bear Hill Pond. You've read that. You would not call that an interim plan, although it's been going for 35 or 40 years, right? They continue to update it. They continue to try different methods. Some work, some don't work. So my suggestion is we would do something similar.
And it's an annual.
They annually give a report to the Natural Resources Commission, their Conservation Commission. And they give a report to the state, as well.
Right, and that concept of annually updating the goals and the progress towards the goals is integral to that plan. And a lot of the impetus for proposing this at all was in response to the lack of information that we felt that we had when we were coming into this process in the first place. That although there had been a series of reporting and some recommendations, it wasn't really clear to what extent any kind of sustained effort had been made towards, addressing those things, or even specifically identifying what the overall expectations were around the pond. So we noticed, if you recall from our earliest presentation, we noticed that there were the seams that were exposed. Recreation has a piece, DPW has a piece, natural resources has a piece, and the environment is changing around it, and the role that Warner Pond is playing in the community is changing. And so we were trying to recognize those dynamics and saying, to say, oh, we're just gonna wait a year would be clearly insufficient time to know any more than we do now. We've been at this a year. So 5 years, I think the way 5 years really came out was we tried to use a 5-year checkpoint as a way of sort of understanding the cost of all the proposals. Everybody was asked to do 5 years, but I think that in this context, we would be looking at something that could easily go longer and evolve over time. I see David also wants to make a comment.
Yeah, we've got David and Malcolm, and then Keith, we'll get you too. Why don't we go, Malcolm? Okay, I saw your hand first, so we'll go to you, then David, and then Keith.
So I am really quite confused about what we're discussing. The original proposal for the management plan was a 5-year plan. And it stated that it did not preclude removing the dam or dredging.
True.
We appear to have a new proposal.
It's the same thing.
No, it isn't. What you wrote in the third person, you wrote, your comments was a we. So I'd like to know, first of all, who the we is.
Happy to. I was making a proposal. He's talking now about the one I had written up. I was
The one that was
suggesting-
Submitted in the,
Yeah.
in the survey.
I was suggesting this is something we would look at. I don't care whether it's, let me finish, Malcolm. But if you read further, you have to see that I said it does not preclude dredging and it does not preclude dam removal. So I don't see, if you read it through, you'd see that.
I did read it through multiple times.
Well, you had to see that then.
You start off by saying, I don't know, if it's your personal opinion, that is better, that helps a lot. There's major changes, however, in your comment from first of all, you say the committee may propose capital expenditures, including dredging.
Yeah.
Fish passage.
Yeah.
A better mechanism.
Keep on going.
You also are proposing a plan that is not a decision between dredging or dam removal. You are proposing to retain the pond, if possible, indefinitely. That's what your proposal says. That is not what your original proposal said.
It always implied that. Mark just told you that.
Well, Mark did, but it wasn't written in there.
Welcome.
Now, I noticed for the first time, the budget presents the first 5 years and mentions ongoing costs would be related. The original budget didn't do that.
Malcolm, no, you know what, Malcolm, this is my proposal. And this may not be what we're talking about. We're talking about and I'm happy to defend my proposal, but I think that's not what he's talking about my addition that I had added in.
So
I'm happy
I
to
wanna-
defend that, but I don't think
One
we
thing
really
just
want that.
process wise, right?
Fine.
This slide here was the original,
Public
original
forum.
survey,
The public
which
forum,
is the public proposal,
right?
okay? We asked all of you, do you have any ideas based on now that you've seen how everyone reacted to these proposals, your fellow task force members, on anything additional or new, right, to potentially build consensus? Bill took it upon himself to write up a detailed proposal.
Mhm.
It does not, there was no expectation that would be identical
No.
to us before, right? That was in fact the instruction. So, but it does sound like there are differences, and Malcolm, I think we can talk about, right?
Sure.
Those differences and, you know, what would be challenging for you to accept, or what you actually might recommend as ways to make it something you could live with if that's possible or of interest, right? But just to be clear, right, this
Yeah.
is about what was in the
Originally-
public forum
Correct.
on this slide that we're looking at right now. Right, and we will certainly, I brought copies of this because it was a substantial proposal, right, so we can look at that as well if needed today. Okay? I see David and then I want to go to Keith. Yeah, David, go ahead. You're on mute, David. You're gonna have to unmute.
not on
Yeah.
mute.
Sorry.
I don't need to say anything unless there's still a perspective that this is an interim plan, the preparing a new recurring management plan as an interim plan. If that's been put to rest, then I don't have anything to say.
Well, Dave,
Is there anybody who still feels that way?
why don't you go ahead and share your perspective? You have the floor. We'd love to hear
Well,
it.
just, this is a natural environment. I think, anything we do is got to be something we've got to pay attention to, manage and have check-in periods and all, and not just think you can make a decision and then that's what it's going to run forever. And I think that's kind of what the problem has been in the past with this place, is that I don't think it has been as actively managed as I think it deserves.
Yeah, thank you, David. Keith, go ahead.
So I think instead of calling it recurring pond management, I was thinking very accurately could it be called adaptive, management, which is typically what these management plans are structured as. So they're more responsive to, the actions that have been attempted. So you do an herbicide treatment 1 year, you wait and see if it worked, then you modify your approach moving forward. You record the results, you do surveys, you use new research, new tools that become available, that does happen. So you adaptively manage, and whether it's a one-time blip period during that or long term, it doesn't really matter. I think it's as long as it's always responding to the current conditions and you have a goal that could basically go on indefinitely. But I don't know why we have to focus on that so much. It's just an adaptive management. We adapt and respond to the conditions.
All right, I'm gonna keep going, okay, so this is now, I think, getting to the part that you were commenting on a minute ago, Malcolm, in the survey, where we asked people to suggest, what are some ideas you have for building consensus, right? Because we said from the beginning, right, we were gonna develop these proposals, we're gonna take a look, see how they landed, and from there, see what do we need to do with these to actually potentially get as many of us on board as possible, right? Maybe we choose one of them and build on it, right? So that's what this question was designed to get at. And in the response to that, right, no members suggested specifically the dam removal proposal or any of the 3 dredging proposals, just as written, right, as ways forward. We did have a number of members, and some members just say offered multiple suggestions. We did have some members suggest that consensus could be achieved by moving forward with some version of recurring management. I think you're right to point out, Malcolm, that not all of those were identical to what is in the proposal that was shared with the group, right, with the public. And then there was also some suggestions to do a pretty significant change, but based on the dam removal, right, but then also dredge the deep hole, right, to make that 10 to 15 acres or so. And then there were also a number of recommendations on ideas that could or should be implemented sort of regardless of the broader plan, like no regrets kind of actions. So just to summarize what we saw, right, here's a bullet of the kind of the key elements. A number of these came from Bill's proposal, but there were also others for recurring management. There was the idea of a watershed management committee preparing a recurring and adaptive management strategy. The idea that this should be have a serious mandate, right? Meaningful implementation with dedicated town funding, a clear mandate indicating this is a priority, setting of goals and measurement against those clear goals. Suggestion that it could eventually propose dredging, fish passage, better drawdown, more feasibility studies, dam removal, or some kind of more informed long-term plan. It should have, again, these are just pulling together the suggestions from various people, but support from a dedicated pond manager or firm, funding through reapplication to the CPC, minimum 5 years, then kind of a check-in and reevaluation. And there was also a suggestion, and I don't know if this belongs here under recurring management or just more generally, that maybe a way forward for the task force could be to agree on something more short-term and then see what can we or what could we agree to more medium or long-term. With respect to the dam removal plus dredging, right, these suggestions didn't have a huge amount of detail, but it was basically doing dam removal, but then also expanding the deep hole and ensuring, making it larger, right, but also ensuring adequate depth in the deep hole to limit the spread of aquatic invasives within it as a result of that dredging. And then in terms of ideas to implement, regardless, we just sort of consolidated these, but there's the bone plunge, public access and parking improvements at Com Ave, Pond Street and or the current dam location, water access and improved viewing from Giroux, the trails, stormwater management from Route 2, the historic panels in the Pocket Park, ongoing monitoring around how the pond is used to help inform decision-making. And then just sort of the last thing there is the bullet around, could we kind of come up with recommendations over time? Put that on both slides, because I think it could go under either. Yeah, question.
I have a question. Can you go back 2 slides? Because so the original, the recurring management plan, I guess we're still calling it that, specifically designated sort of a multi-departmental set of responsibilities, recreation. Is that still captured in that first bullet, that committee would consist of those stakeholders in there? Because I think that's a really,
at least in my idea it was, yeah.
because that's a really important part
Yeah,
of
and
that.
I thought,
That there's not another isolated committee that
nope,
that that group of departments are co-owners of this.
No, I didn't put all the specifics in, Paul. I thought this is the job of this committee and make a recommendation, but I suggested someone from ORS, someone from from the Friends of Warner's Pond, someone from the Recreation Commission, someone from Natural Resources, I think. And then anybody else, another 5, maybe up to 7 people on the committee. But that's my hope. And, also, and I may not have put this in but I may have just forgotten it. In the original proposal, we suggested there should be at least one meeting, open meeting with all the constituent groups, like with Recreation Commission,
That's
et
what you're
cetera.
talking about.
Yeah, and we were that should be in there too. At least once or twice a year, there should be a meeting about Warner's Pond with all the other commissions and groups that have an interest in the pond.
And that was part of the proposal.
It was part of the original.
Right,
proposal.
and we went back and forth, I think in one of the early versions, we had the idea of some kind of pond management committee in, and then I think we actually took it out, but it does make sense that there needs to be some kind of ownership or focus. And the idea of, the model that at least I'm following is something like the Housing Roundtable. We held one of those earlier this week, when all of the groups that are involved in trying to do housing production and housing management in town sit down. We do it 3 or 4 times a year, and talk about what kind of progress is being made on the housing issue from all of those perspectives. And this seems like something that has that sort of perspective. I would throw in there that, the West Concord Advisory Committee is also probably got a role, because this is a, really cornerstone piece of West Concord, and might, so I saw this when I read Bill's piece, the same time you guys did. But, it started me thinking about, okay, so how do you stand that up, and what might be the right representation if we did that?
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. The slight difference is with the Housing Roundtable is that it's basically people coming together to think about how to execute, but not everyone is responsible for the execution.
Right,
In this case, there's enough to do with recreation, public works, NRC specific
mhm.
jobs
Yeah,
to implement this plan. It's a little bit different. This is a little,
Well,
I think
so
that would,
the,
same concept.
just, yeah, the housing production plan, which is something which is formally adopted by the select board, is kind of the roadmap for that,
Right.
and it has, columns of responsibility, tasks and columns of responsibility, and it sort of says, okay, who's actually doing the construction of, new affordable units or acquisition of land and stuff like that. And I think that some sort of controlling matrix would also make sense here.
Yeah.
There should be a Warner's Pond management plan, and then who's responsible for specific elements of that
Right.
yeah,
could
Right.
fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense.
So can we go back one slide?
Go back, so here,
No, where,
forward.
oh no, they said no member.
This one.
So I'm quite sure I made statement that I see the management plan only as an interim, because it was written as a
Mhm.
5-year plan. And I made clear that we need to have a view of the mid to long term final solution. This is my understanding
Okay.
how we were seated. And I don't think we were seated in finding the path of least resistance. If that would have been the task, we could have done that within 1 hour of the first meeting. So I was hoping that I know Concord struggles with making decisions that might be not popular. That we as a task force should focus on is saying is, what is 5 to 20 years down the road? How will this look like? Will it look like with a dam, without a dam? If it's with a dam, what are the solutions to this? And look that, and then looking back at the timeline, the proposal. Why I said is, okay, I could get my arms around the management plan is because it was written for 5 years, and I made clear after the 5 years, it could either continue, to your point, Bill.
Yep.
Which is a decision point of it. It's still the interim. It's 5 years, an interim period. Give me that point.
I'll prove it out.
Yeah, or after 5 years, you say, okay, you have to go back, but what is the long-term view of this? Is the long-term view in this group that in 15, 20 years from now, the dam is there and it is there.
Good question.
So that,
Very good question.
yeah, that's,
Very good question, Sven. I understand your point about interim. I worry a little bit about it having less authority if it's just called an interim committee, as people often find when they're given positions, an interim position. And I would rather it not have that, but perhaps. One more thing I'd say though, philosophically, I don't think this is simply giving into popularity, but if it is, that's the whole point of a town like Concord in terms of a public meeting and town meetings, that you are run by a population, and the people really need to look at what people are thinking in a community.
it was not part of our criteria set. Our criteria
You-
set had nothing in it to say
Well,
what is.
Well, I certainly, was thinking of this all along in terms of its setting in a community. The other thing I would say is, nature has also a long vision. You know, you don't have to resolve this in 5 or 10 or 15 or 25 or 50 years. You know, that doesn't have to be resolved for the nature. There's no catastrophic event that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years in this. So, in that sense, among other things, this does the least harm. No one's harmed by this, by putting this kind of a proposal in place. You are actually giving it an opportunity for those who believe that there's something that could be done to actually work, and give them the chance. And if it doesn't work, visit it again, because who was harmed by it?
But when you say it works, so the ambition of the plan is to solve the current problem.
It's to address it. If you
Address
listen
it,
to
or
any,
it's on its way to a solution.
Well,
So we know what the problem is now ecologically, right? With eutrophication, plant growth, so the recurrent management, the adaptive management has to show some progress.
progress, exactly.
At least progress, if not, okay, we have the solution, we can continue that.
Well,
If
maybe
it's
it's
not working,
Right,
if it's not working,
right.
then we have to pivot.
There will always be a battle against these kind of plants, but we even see it in the Assabet River itself. I was looking at it recently. There's the same growth of these same types of plants in the river itself, wherever it slows down. So it'll always be a battle, Paul, but you're right. My hope would be that this would be a solution in the sense that we have the right techniques in place to be able to address this on an ongoing basis.
And you have to measure progress, so there's
Right.
some baseline, so
Exactly.
we have that
I just
baseline,
want to
we
bring-
have to measure.
I just want to put the record straight because there's no members addressed and I know my answer.
So that doesn't fit with how you believe you would respond?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, that's
Okay.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to put the record
Mhm.
straight.
When I think about the 5-year timeframe though, I'm thinking about what will we know then that we don't know now? And there are a couple of answers. One is the effectiveness of an ongoing effort towards trying to control some of the conditions that we all recognize as detrimental to the pond and its use. I think that if we've attempted in good faith to actually do those things and no progress is being made or the pond is
Yeah.
continuing to degrade, then it becomes a little bit more clear that some other type of investment and effort and resources is gonna have to be made. The other thing that framed it for me quite a bit is, and I've introduced this a number of times, is the number of things that are changing around the pond. In 5 years, we will have a much clearer idea of what's going to be occurring on the MCI property. We should have a much improved vision of what that area of West Concord is gonna look like, how it's likely to be occupied for the next several decades. Earlier this week, we had an MCI advisory board meeting, and one of the questions that came up there was, what's the time frame for that development? And, you know, if we were talking about substantial commercial development, that takes 10 years. Is sort of the early end of time for that sort of thing to be designed, to be proposed, to be developed. And often it's marketed over a 10-year period from the time that it's created. So, you know, the things that I'm thinking about is we are thinking about making a very substantial change in terms of, at least especially with the dam removal side, but even with dredging, we're making a very long-term decision in the face of some short-term substantial uncertainties in the environment. which would become more clear in the time frame that the recurring management plan proposed.
Thanks, Mark.
So just for me and Mark, you and Paul and others are, they have more experience here in town than my 3 years. I'm busy here. My observation so far is again and again, task forces, studies are done on topics. Yeah, then you make a decision to say, okay, it's not the right time right now, which is a valid decision, but there's a lot of information captured in these studies and the various task forces. How do you make sure that when this is potentially revisited in 5 years from now, that all this work is not lost? And I just give
That's a
you an
great question.
example, yeah? The town made 2019 a very comprehensive parking study. Yeah, there's a lot of zoning proposals around parking at the moment in town. None of them looked at the 2019 parking study. Yeah, and you can bring these examples again and again and again. And it feels, to be honest, this is where the emotions come in.
Sure.
It feels frustrating. It feels like we all worked endless hours, and you can easily calculate how many work months over this thing we spent here all together. And I have to give credit to everyone. Everyone was working very hard, getting on the grounds of each of the scenarios and so on. I really have to give credit to everyone here. But I would hate to lose this.
Yeah.
And 5 years from now, when you come to your point, and then suddenly it turns out, let's say the management plan didn't work. Are we seeding then another task force again that is repeating all of this again? Just
Good question.
help me.
Yeah, I understand. Sven, you're absolutely right about all the work that's been put in, and I've seen it myself in other cases, not necessarily in the town, where people put in that kind of work. I know exactly what you mean, and it's just, closeted or put away somewhere on a shelf and it's not looked at anymore. My hope would be that if you create a committee, they are going to be advocates for that pond or for that watershed, and if it's not working, they have all this background that's been constructed for them. I'm hoping even some people here would be on it, that they would follow through. Again, I know what Delia suggests that's not the same by mentioning Bear Hill Pond, but it's the closest I have because I'm out there frequently and I've seen what they've done. They are on it all the time. They have volunteers who are checking wildlife, who are checking water quality, who are doing all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of the thing which I'm envisioning here. That there's an ongoing active committee that's going to report either to natural resources or the town. I'm not sure how to structure that. But who are going to be constantly looking at these things to see if what they're doing is successful. And then there's going to be other tripwires. If the dam comes down on the Concord River, that could be a tripwire to start thinking immediately about moving towards a fish passage on this. So that's how I see it.
Just one counter argument, the parking study,
Yeah.
It was done for the planning board, and the planning board is an ongoing committee that looks at these things.
Oh, well, check this out. Is there a parking committee? No.
But they're doing zoning, parking.
Yes, but they're doing a lot of other things
Yeah,
too.
but-
That's
yeah,
the
but-
problem.
Yeah.
They're doing too many things.
Okay,
and
but
they-
it's just,
I agree. I understand that.
I do have to say that I agree with you as well, Sven. I mean, it would be very disappointing to see that happen. But I guess in our defense as a task force, we did look back at everything. We looked back at the 2012, the 2018. And, we did do a lot of that. So will that happen again? I can't say, but I do agree with Bill that if you've got a committee who is just focused on the pond, that I guess there's the hope and the assumption that this group would maintain this information and move forward with it. Is there a guarantee? Absolutely not.
So I just
At
want to say, Jeff had his hand up for a little while.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jeff.
We're spending a lot of
Yeah,
time on this,
Yeah.
proposed move to consensus, and
Yeah.
there's another one here. That I'd like to talk about because
Yeah.
we seem to be many people assuming that we're just trying to dot i's and cross t's.
Okay, please go ahead.
Um. So, yeah, this concept, I wouldn't, so the 10 to 15 acres, I don't know where that comes from, one of us must have written it down, but I think that. You know, 4 people identified dam removal as a top scoring. Proposal. And I think that a proposal like this, that obviously needs to be refined. Is a path towards compromise, towards addressing 2, sets of priorities that various members of the committee, task force, and various members of the public have identified. And the number 1 scoring thing was environmental outcomes when we looked at one of those bar charts. And clearly, dam removal didn't score well for culture, history, some of the other elements there. I think 10 to 15 acres that seems very large and quite expensive, and so that's just kind of glomming one of the dredge proposals with the dam proposal, which I think would run into cost issues. I think that with the right design, saving on mobilization, getting one organization out there to do dam removal, stream restoration, channel stabilization, and making a little bathtub up at the north side of the pond so that it's free of invasives, provides these recreational resources that people are looking for flat water kayaking, for access, a nice vista from Giroux Park, etc., is the nub of a solution that could please a lot of people.
I can see why you think that, and if there's something attractive, and if I could respond quickly. But I think it's gonna take a long time to develop that proposal. You have to figure out, here we go again, costs, where is it gonna go? How much, how are we gonna get the funds for it? All the things that you had done originally in either dredging or in dam removal ought to be reviewed and resurfaced and reworked again. And even the fact that we aren't sure if it's right now, I think the deep hole is about 5 acres, 6 acres.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting to 10 to 15,
I'm not
all that,
suggesting.
you're not, I know. But all that would have to be reworked.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where I would see that as being, one of the ideas you could put into the thought of a Warner's Pond Management Committee to think about this for the future.
Well, any of our proposals needed 100% design plan. Dam removal needs that, dredging needs.
But this isn't, I mean, this is brand new for us. And I'm not complaining. It's a fascinating idea, but it's brand new,
It doesn't
right?
seem radically different from everything we've talked about.
It doesn't?
No, we've talked about dredging, we've talked about dam removal. What's new here?
Well, it's moving away from the original dredging area, and it doesn't have any sense of cost associated with any of this. We don't know what this will cost.
Give me your cost, precise cost, Bill.
What's
A
that?
5-year management plan, what's the cost?
Oh, I have it in that proposal. I do. It may not be accurate, but it's in there.
Well, I don't think, I think as a potential
Potential.
for reaching consensus, I think.
Oh, I
those
see.
are
Okay,
false
that's good point.
barriers.
No,
Good point.
you're not gonna get consensus because it has not been proven that that stream is gonna go through the deep hole. I, for one, strongly believe it won't. So no matter what you do there,
I think
It's
the
not gonna
idea,
happen
I've
with your
made this
visioning.
analogy before, it's like saying we're gonna build a road, but we don't know where it's gonna go. I mean, engineers, Dan Stapleton, our resident engineer, said, tell me where to put a river, I'll put it there. I think that's undervaluing the talent of engineers and the ability to make that happen.
So I see Malcolm and Liz, you wanted to chime in as well. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, well, as the person who put this proposal forward, we have to reach a compromise, and I hate to say it, the management plan isn't a compromise. It's kicking the ball down the road to make a decision, the same decision that we're faced with now, but in 5 or 10 years down the road.
I don't see it. I don't want to argue. I mean, don't make such
I'm not
the
gonna
hard
I don't want
arguments.
to
Okay.
argue, this
Okay.
is my opinion, okay? Everybody can reject it. I'm very happy to do that. I do not see the management plan as being a compromise between keeping the pond and restoring the brook to where it should be. The management plan is almost completely a decision to retain the pond. And it is explicit in your proposal that dam removal would only occur if everything else fails.
Correct.
So the management plan is not a compromise in any way. It is simply a plan to retain the pond and kick any decision down the road to decide if dam needs to be removed. What I want to do here is to find something that is acceptable to the people who love the pond. I love the pond. Yeah, I use it a lot. You laugh at me for that? I'm sorry.
Laugh at me all the time.
Hey, guys, let's not go down here.
I'll take it
Keep
outside
it- keep
with you
it-
sometime
keep
if
it.
you want to call me a liar.
Come on, guy.
Guys, let's keep this,
Let
keep
this
this
go.
polite,
Really
no, I
nice
know ad
nothing.
hominem. This is-
I am
Both of
sorry.
you.
I do not like to be spoken to like that.
I know how you feel.
I think we need to find a way for the people who truly love the pond and with complete justification, and the unequivocal need to restore that watershed, that part of the brook back to where it should be for both environmental and other reasons. And that's our charge. It's not to kick the ball down the road. It's not to make a single decision. We'll keep the pond and, you know, that's not what our charge is. We're betraying our charge. And we are also betraying all of the people who have come in here and given us the benefit of their expertise. And we're still sitting around saying, well, we don't know enough. I don't believe that. I think we have all of the information we need to make this decision. I'm finished for the day.
Do you wanna say something?
No, Liz,
David has his hand up.
you said Liz next.
Yeah, so we're gonna go to Liz and then David. Go ahead, Liz.
I'm struggling to think if I'm actually gonna be adding anything here, so. I have been struggling for a very long time I'm struggling in general with this whole kit and caboodle, right? Like every other day, I'm like, well, yeah, no. But, I'm currently struggling with like, there are a lot of things that should be facts that are still opinions within this group, and I feel like that means we failed somewhere along the way. And I don't know how we make a big decision if there are things that feel very much like they should be facts and they aren't. And so I don't really know how to move forward from that. I think that, I don't know, I don't think it's adding anything here, so I'm
Could
sorry.
you, for clarification, you explain facts and opinion, what you were
Yeah,
just
wait,
saying?
what do you mean?
Well, I
Say
feel
more.
like things like, it should be a fact that we know where the pond is going. The fact that it's still an opinion is a struggle. I mean, even in our public meeting, we had like, oh, our opinions are all different about whether X, Y, Z are happening. And these feel like things that we should understand and know what's gonna happen environmentally, what's gonna happen, like, and I don't know, I don't know. It is,
Liz, do you think that there's something that of the things that you've talked about, can you say whether there's something that you feel like you know about the pond? Or it's hard for me to understand if you're
Yeah.
in the uncertainty.
it just feels like there's so many things that we're still talking about, that we've been talking about since the beginning. That like, why do we not have an answer on yet? Like, how come we can't come to an agreement? And I think this is something I was concerned about the very beginning. At the very beginning, how do we determine what our facts are? And we were kind of, I feel like along the way, we've been like, well, we'll all say this is our view of the facts. But like, when it comes to a decision, you can't all have different views on the facts. And I don't know. I had this whole plan to like write down specific examples that I was thinking of, and I did not. But
I was
sorry.
trying to ask if there was something that you felt that you are sure of, that you feel is, that for yourself, you feel is a fact. rather
Yeah, I
than
mean, I
belief.
feel like it is a fact that you'll have better biodiversity if you remove a pond. I mean, if you remove a pond, if you remove a dam, which I remove a pond. And like, we should have some more certainty on that. Like, everyone should be able to be on the same page about that, whether it's my page or not. Like, that feels like something that everyone in this room should be on the same page of, about, before we make a large decision that is either investing a large sum of money in something that, you know, doesn't, you know, or changes something irreversibly, you know, like, I don't know.
A lot of times, Liz, I just want to say, for me, the problem has often been, we might know facts, but it's the interpretation of facts. You know, for example, is it chilly outside or is it just, is it a nice day? I mean, and is it just a damp Irish day? I mean, it's 46 degrees. That's the fact. But what is it? I mean, how do you interpret that? And that's often where we find ourselves, I
I think
think,
that's a fair,
in the struggle,
I think that's
you
fair.
know? It's the interpretation of the facts.
But to support Liz, the fact is that a riverine system with multiple biomes has a great deal more diversity than an artificial pond.
You know what, Malcolm,
But
I,
it's a fact.
I'm gonna try this with you. When I wrote my thing out, I gave it that. It doesn't change my value about what should happen to the pond.
Right, but there are people who
Have different
deny-
values. I mean, you probably didn't put as much weight on the community life or, I'm not sure. I have no idea what you
Read
put.
it. I did not. no.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's interpretation of the facts that we see that has the biggest
But
impact.
I then recognized my bias and tried to propose something that was a compromise.
Oh, this, yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I haven't just sat here and said, this is my opinion. Blah, 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 blah. No, I want to compromise with
understand,
people.
I
I
understand.
want to retain
I understand.
open water. But I would like to be able to do that in such a way that restores biodiversity. Yes, there's lots of wildlife around. Yes, there's lots of fish and whatever, but they are so limited. I think, you know, I mean, I need
Well,
to stop.
one of my views on that particular fact, though, is the location of this particular body of water is immediately adjacent to one of the denser, more populous parts of Concord. So if you had an impounded body of water that was in the middle of a forest someplace without humans literally living in their homes 100 feet away from it, you would, the argument for letting that go free and expecting that biodiversity is really gonna flourish there is certainly stronger than when you know that this is in the immediate environment of, you know, arguably a highway in the form of Route 2, suburban backyards abutted directly, and is a piece of a built suburban environment. And so I'm thinking about this in the context that it is. And recognizing, you know, maybe because I stopped this week and helped a painted turtle across the road that was invariably going to get run over by one of our car wheels if it didn't get off the road. I recognize the value of trying for, you know, pristine biodiversity with the adjacencies that this particular body of water has is challenging. And it's a growing portion of the recreational resources that this town has to offer. It's likely to be the only sort of freely accessible, or one of the few freely accessible bodies of water. It's certainly part of a walkable neighborhood. So I'm thinking about how does it function in that context, rather than a purely environmental diversity, you know, the diversity of the ecological environment context, because you can't move it. It is where it is.
I think you're moving away from what our original.
Well,
point
no,
was.
I'm not.
Yes,
at all.
hey, guys,
At
I
least
wanna-
not in my mind. because-
Liz's point
Yeah,
was that there are certain facts
yeah.
that people will not necessarily acknowledge as facts and believe that they are interpretable.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah,
other people
You're
who
you're
also
putting
want-
forward a very good argument. which
Yeah,
I-
so,
In
so
terms
folks,
of
I think we,
moving towards consensus,
Yeah.
I did want to make one comment.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that one of the functions that this task force could do, considering how deeply we've studied this, is to try to put some of those, I think they'll use the term tripwires or, milestones that in place that say, for example, we have a dam there now that was recently reconstructed. That dam has a useful operational life on the order of a number of decades. Should that dam ever be replaced? If we answered that question clearly in our final report, that would be a start towards saying, over some time period, which is, from an ecological perspective, a relatively small one, what's going to happen here and what do we think happens here? And by the way, humans, when they know that something is going to change in a particular period of time, can plan and adapt to that. And so I think we could make some statements along those lines to say that within these various decision checkpoints, these are the kinds of things that we think the town should be going down. That's just one of my
yeah,
suggestions.
thanks, Mark. So I do want to actually move us towards the next phase of this conversation.
Does he want to keep?
Yeah, David's had his hand up for a while, so I want to let David
Please.
have the last word here, then we're gonna move to the next phase here.
Okay.
So go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just, I don't agree with the characterization that we have all the information now to make a decision. And I think that's why this recurring management plan makes sense. I'll give some examples. First, what I've heard is, well, to improve the biodiversity of the fish, or the key ones that we're trying to make this dam is supposedly blocking, is predicated on dams further up or further downstream being removed. So until that happens, we really don't know we're not gonna get that diversity there. I've also heard that we really don't know how that river is going to behave when we remove the dam. And it's not clear to me, in my responsibility and access to Scout Island, how that's going to look like. I hear there's a great deal of unknown. I do think that this body of water or this whole environment has really not had management. But it just doesn't seem that it's had management at all, especially like as you compare to Bear Hill Pond. And I think we owe it to our community to try to manage it. And then we have, three big things that are happening. One is downstream dam removal, see what happens with them, MCI and the change of Route 2. These are huge things that actually change our community. And I think the responsible thing is to take measurements, do some active management, really understand this environment better. And so I take issue with saying we're just kicking the can down the road. I think it's a very responsible approach, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
David. So I want to move us to the next phase of this conversation where we're actually going to try to get some clarity on a direction that we're going to go down, and build that out as much as we can in a way that generates consensus. So we sent around a poll beforehand that took the two solutions that were put forward that were kind of mutually exclusive, right, around what people saw as compromises or ways to build consensus, right? I hear folks are saying, this isn't a compromise, or it is. This is what you all suggested, right? Potential compromises. And there were kind of two buckets. One was recurring management, and the other was the dredging of the deep hole, right? Plus dam removal. So obviously we didn't have the benefit of this conversation. We were not saying, could you live with each of these? But we did say, which do you see as the more viable pathway towards consensus? And here were the responses that we saw. So we had 7 people naming recurring management, 2 people naming dam removal plus dredging and deep hole, and then 2 other responses. These are not anonymous, so I can just name, right? So Sven, said, I think you were the second one here, I think, right? Naming, you know, this question around the interim solution that you brought up, right, in this meeting, right? Right, that you think we need to make a decision, so, right, you wanna, yeah, you're not sold yet on recurring management as currently framed. And likewise, we had Liz saying, okay, you're not comfortable blanket saying it's better because you know, you are concerned that some people might be seeing this as a stopgap dredging, which for you raises some concerns. And then we also had, you know, a number of people as obviously we're voting for recurring management, and then we had Malcolm and Jeff putting dam removal plus dredging as their top choice. Again, this is not whether you could live with the other one or not, just which one you would most prefer. So I think we, as a task force, need to kind of,
Wait, kind of point of
Yeah,
clarification,
please.
'cause I don't
Yeah.
think it was which do you most prefer. I think it was which do you think.
it's a
most
better
people-
avenue to seek
Yeah, 'cause
alignment.
that- My answers are different.
Yeah,
based on that,
thank
So I would like
you.
to.
Very important.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about consensus.
Thank
right?
you for clarifying, Liz, right? So I think we need to decide what is the avenue we're going to go down here. That doesn't mean that we can't add language that is going to address or try to add language to address the concerns or add concepts to address the concerns to maximize consensus, but we obviously can't have as the basis of our recommendation, both dam removal plus dredging lead deep hole and some version of adaptive or recurring management. So I want to ask the group now, like, can we decide on one of these ways forward, right? You see the votes, right? These are your proposals, your votes. I want to leave it there, but I think looking at this, if we are going to reach an agreement, right, that gets maximum consensus, I have a hard time seeing how that's going to happen if we don't go for the recurring management. But if someone has a pathway, right, that you think could actually work, seeing all the information that we've all seen, like, this is a forum to decide that, right? But we do need to decide which one we're gonna do, and we have, you know, an hour and a half to get clarity on that and then try to build it out as much as we can. Yeah, Jeff.
Simple question, would anybody in a little bit more conversation tonight be open or curious, like, if a few questions were answered? I'd like to learn more about the combined stuff. If you,
I mean, that would have been my choice if I was like in a sort of like, which would you prefer, rather than which do you think is the most. Likely.
we don't need a long conversation, but if folks said, yeah, let's talk about it, otherwise, you know, the numbers are what they are.
I wouldn't change
So
my mind.
It seems like folks aren't gonna move off the 4 versus 7 or
For
that
me,
pie chart.
for me, it depends where this path goes, and that is with respect to the dollars put behind the recurring management plan, because I saw versions now that included, let's say, investment in a fish ladder, and then just take that as an example, which is an investment I would only see to be done when it's decided
Correct.
Exactly,
it's the final solution.
exactly.
Yeah, and not, you're lingering
I
along.
see what you're saying.
Yeah, so, and then with that, if you're lingering along, putting a fish ladder in, then figuring out that the management plan doesn't work, then we say, oh, we could put all the money now in the fish ladder and all of that, so we can't do the different thing. Because I think your proposal will cost-wise sit somewhere between the dam removal and the dredging. And I'm personally very sensitive against costs. That's
Yeah,
with my
oh, absolutely.
rating, that's where
Yeah.
I'm very high. So, but that's also why I'm super sensitive
I get that.
on the cost for the management plan, because you can make decisions that by making that investment, you're making it the final pass, no matter how successful the management thing is. So,
Good point.
if you're discussing putting money like a fish ladder and other stuff on it, then we should think about seriously another solution or a different thing with similar cost profile.
So for me, I dropped it in my estimation. Because I thought it's something that, to be honest, Oars and others especially would want to see at some point if it stayed. But I understand your point. It does sort of solidify,
Yes.
the dam staying. It's just as a placeholder, Sven. I mean, I could see that. I mean, I'm more interested in some of the other things that were put in there than that. I mean, I'd like to see a fish passage if it's Amria. Probably speaking of, I don't know how to handle that situation. You're right. It's a delicate spot and I don't know what to do. Except I'd say, I wouldn't want to make a promise they wouldn't do a fish ladder, because I can imagine an organization, not saying Oars would, but if the dam is in place and the fish are coming up and they're hitting this barrier, we might get a lot of pressure to put a fish ladder in,
Or take them.
or take the dam down.
We also have to see that perhaps, I don't know, we might have to do major repair in 10, 15
That's
years.
correct. That's
Do we
correct.
want to put the major repair cost against the dam?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Both of those things are correct. So this, to me, this is something that group would be working on and watching, to see what's to be done.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a little hung up on the word recurring, given the conversation here, and we're gonna have to communicate this to the public. As to, David made the observation that we haven't been managing the pond. I'm not sure that's exactly true, but this is
Yeah.
different. This has got to be different. It's got to be communicated. It's different. So the words adaptive, dynamic management, we need to embody that. We need to communicate
Absolutely.
that. And recurring is a good word, but I think we need something a little bit more
I get that.
exciting and descriptive, because that's what we're talking about. We're
Yeah.
talking about a group that's going to be looking at this and changing.
Yeah.
And perhaps down the road reversing. We just don't know, but
don't
it's dynamic. So
Exactly.
I think,
That's
I'd
exactly.
like to think about changing the words. It make me feel happier about.
I have no problem with
communicating
that,
this.
because that's fine with me.
This isn't kicking the can down the road. This
No.
is
It's
doing
robust. It's
something that
actually-
we can probably afford to do.
Yeah.
That might answer some questions that we don't have the answers to right now.
Right.
And
It's a very good point. I mean, I think recurring was something that somebody had mentioned at some point. It doesn't have to be that. It could be.
yeah, I don't get hung
It
up
was
on the
better
words. I
than the
just-
previous word, it was worse word.
We had a word going for a long time, do nothing.
The do nothing.
Do nothing.
But I want us, yeah, it's to do nothing.
Yeah.
I want us
so
to
think-
feel that this is something different.
This is a robust notion. This is a robust management team.
And we're gonna have to invest in it. I don't know how much,
Right.
but we're gonna have to, it's not a no-cost option.
It's not a no cost, and I think Sven is right, if we immediately say we're gonna move towards a fish ladder, that would solidify something, and we need to think about that further. So, yeah, that's all true. That group would have to think about it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just asked just to see whether that other one is worth testing or further discussing. It seems like it's not, but I still have major problems with this recurring management
go ahead.
concept.
Yeah.
I think it is sort of represents a failure of our work here. I think it's unlikely to make any change. I think Bill, in the proposal, it says, what's the harm? I think it's a waste of time and money. I think it's a waste of significant town staff resources. I think it's highly unlikely that a sufficient community effort will arise to take on this complex work. And I think it's ducking some difficult decisions that we're armed to make because we've spent 14 months, thousands of hours pursuing our charge. And I think it's not meeting our charge. I think it's not likely to improve environmental or recreational benefits. So I think that represents a failure, and I think it's a real regret that given all of our time and expertise and energy here, and commitment to working with each other, that I think it's a punt.
Would you have felt better about a dredging option? It meant more than that requirements, or it was only damming?
You saw in my scoring,
Yeah.
as I presented, I'm primarily interested in environmental improvements in the long term, right after we're all long
Yeah.
gone from West Concord. And I just don't think dredging is gonna achieve.
So would you have characterized that as a failure too, then, Jeff? If we voted for that?
I'd say it would be a huge
Yeah.
miss and not achieve
Yeah.
some really important things that we've heard from a lot of experts. I think it would ignore the vast expertise that we've drawn on and heard from in professional presentations in this room and comments from very smart, talented, committed people. So
And you're-
if we were to pursue this, sorry, if one of your questions, Toby, was, can you live with this? Or what could,
Yeah, that's the next question.
if you were to
Like,
live with it.
what
So-
could we do to make this?
yeah, I just,
Less-
again, you may have this slide up here and getting to prompt us on this. I have very specific thoughts on that.
Yeah,
If we get to that.
so that's,
point.
that's actually the next.
I was just
question we
gonna,
wanna
I was just gonna ask,
Yeah.
in response to, explain why this isn't a
Well,
failure.
first of all, environmentally, I can see why you would suggest that there's more biodiversity. In fact, as I mentioned to Sven, to Malcolm a few minutes ago, that was the highest rating I had given, was to dam removal. There's no question, I can live with that, but there's other values in the community. And they weighed as high, if not higher, in this case.
I just
No,
don't-
I know, you can disagree on that, but I can say that weighed higher for me in the overall picture of the whole community. And so I don't see that as a failure, I see this as involving the community, seeing that possibility and trying to work with ways that we could get there. And because I've had a lot, I mean, I don't have the expertise that Delia has or you have, but because of what I've seen at what they're trying to do out at Bear Hill, and I've talked to their head of their commission out there, I feel like there's some real possibilities for us to play out. It may not work, I understand it may not work, but many things don't necessarily work. But this is not gonna be that expensive, at least in my opinion, and we can get through it with the Community Preservation Committee reapplications. So in terms of environmental loan, sure, but that is not the entire value.
And sorry to jump back in, I don't question the values, we all have our own values that we've brought to this and we're looking at this. I don't think those values will be served through this,
Oh, see, that's where I really do disagree with you.
so I don't think it'll change it.
I wanna hear from Keith and then
Oh,
let's.
did you have something else you
Did
wanted?
you have a thing?
No, I just want to get the conversation.
Yeah, no, it's good.
I appreciate this back and forth, and I appreciate Jeff, you kind of raising the issue and kind of processing it and explaining your stance. And I think we want to have a conversation, for those who I think might feel disappointed by this. What can we do, right? How can we make this something that you can really live with, right? But I do want to give Keith, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah.
And haven't had much of a chance to share today, so go ahead.
Just a question for Jeff. I think, it's good to understand your perspective, but like, what do you feel about maintaining Emerson Field as an open recreational facility that's quite large? Do you want to restore the forest there?
No, because I don't think it would represent an opportunity to connect a 45 square mile watershed.
It could be the start of a
to-
larger,
I don't think it represents a program that's been identified by a state agency as one of the top 3 areas of investment for environmental restoration. That'd be DVR, and we heard from Joe spoke about dam removal. Okay, Malcolm? Dam removal, cranberry bog restoration, salt marshes, the state's top priorities. It's not a priority as expressed in the state's biodiversity plan as dam removal is. It's not something that has a Fish and Game staff member that we heard from about the importance of aquatic habitat connectivity. And priorities for NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Agencies, and US Fish and I think US Army Corps too. And so the biodiversity impact, it would not be there to restore what's the field, 10-acre forest relative to restoring habitat connectivity. 17 miles of river miles directly and into a 45 square mile watershed. It's a major component of our Sewaska watershed. So if you work in environmental field, well, in all of our fields, you identify the top priorities that are going to have the greatest impact, and that's where you're leaning. And a lot of agencies and a lot of people we spoke with are leaning into dam removal. So that's
development overall, including towns like Concord, has a direct negative impact on biodiversity as a whole. So there's like a lot of development in this whole region, all the cities that have been built. There's a lot of direct impact to biodiversity. So those failures too. Should we start reversing all development?
we should take restoration actions where we can. We've all heard for 30, 40 years, think globally, act locally. here's an opportunity to act locally and we're passing it up.
So should we start ripping up roads in Concord too?
I think, yeah, I
Okay.
think, yeah.
This has
It's
the
adventurous.
highest points in the survey that dredging has by far across all criteria, the highest point on the ecological sustainability. So I think this group settled
Dredging?
that, and we
Yeah.
don't need to discuss this.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Okay, so I wanna have the conversation now, right? I think we are aligning, right, that we need to try to build as much consensus as we can on some version of an adaptive plan. That's what I'm hearing from the group. I think that we may get, some folks aren't thrilled with that, some folks are, right? It seems like if we're gonna reach our goal, right, which was, overwhelming agreement, right? This seems like the viable approach is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
But if I am wrong on that, right, and folks think there's another avenue, right? This is a moment to make that case. Yeah, Vicky.
Yeah, I think that's an important discussion to have, because I think from the 7 people who, saw or read what that was and agreed that that was the right path to follow. For me, it's really important to understand the elements of it that were attractive, and it wasn't watering it down to say it's an adaptive management plan for only 5 years, after which we were gonna remove the dam. That is not what I voted for, and it's important to say, to me, what I read out of that plan, and maybe you corrected that a little bit, Bill, was it's a recurring management plan for that pond, which maintains the pond. I think Malcolm, I agree with what you said. That is kind of what this goal of this, hiring this pond management company. We're gonna tell them our goal is to keep the pond, and what are we gonna do to keep it? What are the actions you're gonna take that maintains this pond? It was important for the vote. And that the reason there's a time limit on it is because we want to understand if the actions we are taking through this company, this pond management group, and the company we hire are and if they're working, we're going to continue them. And it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. We will then take a look at what else is going on in Concord and see if there are other things we should be doing, fish passage, more trails. Maybe there's a bridge that goes over this because there's so many people who live here. Those are things that this group would then take on based on what's happening around it. But the goal is adaptive pond management plan that recurs if it's working.
If it's working.
If it's working.
That's the metrics,
Absolutely.
the setting
Which
the
is
goals
what
and the
we're looking
metrics.
We'll know
Really
more
important.
only when we do this.
Yeah. Doesn't mean we keep, if it's not working, it doesn't mean we just.
No.
do the same thing.
But but if it's working, this is recurring. That's not like, it's only 5 years.
So, I see your hand, Sven. I see Jeff's hand. I do really want to move us to a part of this conversation where we are building out this proposal. And I think the focus here, at least at the outset, I want to check in with those of you who are not thrilled with this. Right? And I want to ask you, what do you suggest? Could we build into this to make it better? Not something that you will then love, but something that maybe you can live with, or maybe even feel a little bit better than I can live with it. And that also you think is likely to be acceptable to the group, right? And build a consensus rather than divide. So, I have some questions here, right? For those of you who do not, I think focus on this second bullet, like what could we add or change here, right? That would make this feel better for you, and then really for everyone, what else do you think we could build in here to make this stronger, right? More of, say here, one of the statements, one of the concerns is we're not doing enough, right? To make this more of achieving what you see as our goal, right? Our charge as a task force. So those are the questions I want to put to the group. I want to build this out. I want to see, how much can we build into this to make it as acceptable as possible to everyone. So Jeff, I know Sven, you have your hand up as well. I'll get to both of you.
Give Jeff.
Yeah.
So we've got kind of 2 buckets
Okay,
to
great.
answer that question. One is that this not be open-ended, and a lot of people are saying this here. So we need some very carefully crafted language to make sure this is time-bound and is regularly evaluated I think the spirit of adaptive management is right on. As Keith termed it, and this bill spirit, or the spirit of the
That's what you're saying,
proposal captured that. But we don't want to get to 5 years and 6 years and be like, oh, weren't we gonna go pull that this spring and no one showed up and what happened with that?
Mhm.
So 5 years with a commitment to evaluation, that there be objectives. What are we trying to do out there? Not have a bucket full of water chestnut, but reduce, well, whatever,
Mhm.
these. I can come up with stuff now, but this should be refined and determined. Improvements to water quality, environmental or ecological, biodiversity and recreational benefits as well. That those should be determined and then monitored, metrics set for percent improvement. And then in 5 years, determine, are we achieving that or not? Importantly, I think that all should be designed and monitored and reported on by a consultant, a body that's different from the entity that's carrying that work out. You know what I mean? We can't have our pond management company saying, yeah, we're doing fine, let's keep it up, or we just need 5 more years.
Mhm. Mhm.
So those are some important elements. And then if at 5 years, like, we're starting to see progress, then have sort of, I don't know, 2-year check-ins. Are we still seeing progress, or are we no longer seeing progress?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then a commitment or a statement from this group that if we're not meeting metrics, if this adaptive management approach is not working, I think 5 years is a healthy experiment. Say, okay, that is off the table. This is not working.
Mhm.
And back to my earlier comment, because we're not addressing the underlying issues. Anyways, that's commentary.
Yeah.
I think it should have a not to exceed price. We have our number in here, but we can't get 3 years out and say, what we need? We need a harvester. We only had $600,000. We could get a water chestnut harvester. Then we'd be in business. So we throw money at anything, right? And say, well, we're not achieving it because we need more money. So we need some sort of budget not to exceed price. And then we can't get 5 years out and say, geez, we've already spent $400,000. If we spend 200,000 more, we'll be there.
Mhm.
So we can't have that sunk cost fallacy. I think a couple people have mentioned here, no big investments in retaining the pond if there was some damage. I mean, we had a report that there's a need for some remedial action out there. I think that's probably reasonable, but
Mhm.
I think kind of,
What do you mean by that? Can you repeat that?
well, I think this is unlikely, but I think Bill, maybe you gave the example or Sven did, if there was damage to the pond and we, Scott, sorry, the dam. And we decided, if I said pond, I'm sorry about that, to the dam, the town needs $1 million to repair the dam. That should be
Right,
something
right.
that,
Can I interject something into that though? But, so the dam has had, 2 reports over the past 10 years. And in the first report said, this needs to be done, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. Okay. The next report came out 5 years later. Oh, by the way, these same things
Right.
need to be
I
done.
think that standard maintenance is reasonable.
So those can be done.
Okay, so
Yeah, I
yeah,
think you're saying like something catastrophic
Like if
happens.
we like,
Yeah,
oh, we have
don't
to
want that.
redo.
We have, let's say, a structural issue on the dam, which really needs significant
Right,
dollar amounts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that should trigger.
The
let's
question
say,
about.
Reconsideration.
Yeah,
And then-
reconsideration,
Yeah.
is it
Right.
worthwhile to put, I don't know,
Mhm.
whatever the dollar amount
Yeah.
is. I should say, let's say $3 million to rebuild it.
Yeah. And I think the other bucket is capturing things that we've learned as a group. So that in
Yeah.
5 years, 7 years, 10 years, next task force is seated and people say, geez, what,
Mhm.
we're starting from scratch here.
That's what, yeah,
Mhm.
it's,
We had some back and forth here about biodiversity. We said in our joint report in the preface,
Mhm.
that dam removal would be the most ecologically, would be the most beneficial outcome for biodiversity and ecology. We've already agreed to that. We can cut and paste that language.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think it would be important from my perspective to capture, and others can say like, we should capture this information, that's fine. This isn't sort of a only list, but my list. That we heard from the long list of experts saying that dam removal would be preferable ecologically. Including Joe Gould, Stephen Maddox, Ben Wetherell, there's a letter in the public, forum from this week from Concord Land Conservation Trust trustees, Wild and Scenic River Stewardship Council. I can send you this list. Brian Windmiller, David Swain, the Boy Scouts, David, voted for dam removal, that they, as scouts, based on what they're learning, think that dam removal and river restoration is the way to go. I think it's really important that we capture all that, those voices and those expertise, elements of expertise that we solicited and we heard. And that we as members in average scoring rated ecological sustainability as the top criterion. I think be valuable. We've talked about various ways we've received public input, public have expressed input, including the spreadsheet. But I think the 2023 town survey that showed that 54% of people somewhat or completely supported dam removal is an important data point. And I would want to avoid a call for more study. I mean, stakeholder engagement is not bad, but this leaving the sense that we didn't do enough as a group, I really want to avoid that.
So completely.
Yeah.
Sort of
completely
insulting
agree.
to all the efforts we've put in.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I would differentiate that particular point against some ongoing data collection that tries to actually quantify the water conditions, the state of the.
Yeah,
That's the monitoring.
But saying
Yeah.
like, I don't know what to do. We
Right.
need to study.
I mean,
this.
No.
the question directionally, we should be able to answer in this time frame. Is any of this working, or
Yeah.
is this just, you know, to use your phrase from earlier, wasting time?
Yeah, so that's the first bucket is,
Mhm.
is measuring, having objectives, not just saying, yeah, I think there's fewer weeds out there. Having somebody separate, independent entity studying that and seeing if we're making mistakes. It's having time bound and money bound, and then making decisions at that point, not just continuing it because now we've apparently made this long-term commitment to doing that. These other elements that I think many of us agree on, I think, you know, like the trails and dumps and stuff, I have other things like that that I'd also really like to see. In there.
Great.
And then I heard we were all kind of near the same page here, but I also like the idea of no investment in fish passage at this point. You know, until, let's say, in 5 years and then 10 years, like, holy cow, this whole pond's been transformed. Jeff was totally wrong. A lot of people can laugh. And the Talbot Mills
Right.
Dam is down, and like, hey, maybe the best outcome at this point.
Right.
But
So like
not in the
there
short-
has to be a trigger where there's a long-term decision made before you would do that kind of investment, just equivalent to kind of the damage to the dam, right? Similar, okay, yeah. Okay,
I get that right, no investment in, right, at this point, okay,
At this point.
at this point, right.
I would like to speak now
Go ahead.
before we
You've been
move
very-
on to other things, if I may. I don't appreciate you characterizing the Boy Scouts in your list of experts as having voted for dam removal. This opinion we got from them was before this committee even formed, based on very little information and without presenting to them all the impacts and options. For instance, that they would potentially lose access to the island. You know, it was just, you put them in the list of all these experts who we've heard from, and I just think you're mischaracterizing, and I don't think that counts.
thanks, David.
I think Sven was.
Yeah, Sven, you were, had your hand up from before, so I'll go to you.
Yeah, no, and Jeff, you had perfect list that's covered more or less everything I had on my list. So, but I would, again, because I'm super sensitive against costs and what does it mean. Is definitely for me, the fish ladder or damage to the dam has the same point before we make a decision on a fish ladder. It should reopen the consideration. Is it actually better to take the dam down at that point? Also, I think we should acknowledge somewhere in the final document that they are kind of forces from outside of Concord. So if you look at the Massachusetts-wide trend, that dams are getting removed, that we might face the question from the outside at a certain point to take the dam down from like, higher ups. So that should be on the radar, given where the trend goes. And again, perhaps it's my personal history. I grew up in Germany. When I was teenager, all dams around my hometown were taken down in the 80s. Yeah, and all communities cried. And today they're super happy. So perhaps I'm pre-configured that I learned it's fine. But I also pre-configured to see the trend
Yeah, I see
where
that.
it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and all infrastructure things, and that's again, perhaps the public works view. We are looking at 10, 20, 30-year trends. And that perhaps the thing in the moment looks different if you look on the long term. And I believe in that time frame, I strongly believe, again, this is not a fact, it's a belief,
Mhm.
that we will be asked to take them down.
could be, could be.
Could be, but I think, I also think though that that would be certainly down the road, given the fact of there's so many other dams within the state that are in really bad shape and are really critical to come down, and I think those are being prioritized, and so I think it's a
Talking 30
possibility.
years.
Yeah, it's a
30 years
possibility,
from now,
but,
this place
you
will look
know,
a lot different.
of course.
As part of what's
Of course.
happening.
Yeah.
And there'll be different people living.
so
here.
just something to consider as well, but tie in with your statement.
So I see Vicky's hand, and I think one thing I want to just name, right, and Malcolm, great. We're putting a list of all these things, and I want to encourage you, if you have, big red flag concerns about something, think about like, not just, how do I X that out, but can I find a way to make this work for me? Right, what would I add to that, or to make it work for me? Like that, we're trying to build on this, okay?
So far, I'm sorry, Vicky, everything that Jeff and Sven has said, so far, I think it's all workable. So I'm probably pretty good about
Yeah.
those things.
So I was just gonna, two things. One is, I think the Envision Concord criteria is our criteria. That's what we were tasked with as a task force. I think that needs to be the primary. Like, what's the criteria of this group going to be, this, whatever the subcommittee is, they need to live by the Envision Concord criteria, and we did a pretty good job of trying to do that all along, and so that needs to come up to them, and they need to be familiar with it, and they need to look at our comments on it, because we spent some time on making sure we understood it. So number one. Secondly, on how do we maintain all the stuff we've learned?
Yeah,
We've done a really good job of capturing it into this website, including the public comments. I'm wondering if we can maintain that website and not take everything off and then have to recapture it somewhere. So if we can maintain that location for the task force and call it the new adaptive management task force, or whatever it's gonna be called, they would have access to it forever, right? All of the reports, all of the information, all of the public comment would live there, and we don't have to go and somebody has to go and find it all again. So that would be my recommendation for how we capture this and keep it alive. And then I do, on the dollar amounts up there, that was the one that I would trigger a little bit, because I know how sometimes escalation works in this world, and trying to predict what dollars are going to be the right numbers. I would say it should have some sort of criteria and not a dollar amount, but it's like some sort of extraordinary, it should be a description of how we would feel about it, like extraordinary investment. And then they would have to come back to the town to say, we've reached this kind of limit we think is kind of extraordinary. We're gonna ask for something bigger. And then we might be able to say no, because we weren't supposed to do that. But I don't want to give it a number, because I don't know. We don't know. Tariffs, COVID, like all of those things, stuff happened to construction we would have never predicted 5 years ago. But we had to work through that. We didn't stop building things. So I would say, be careful on numbers, and let's figure out how we could live with the price restriction. That is not a dollar amount necessarily. And then finally, I would say on the Boy Scouts, I did look, there was one comment on there that came on like, dear blank, blah, 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 we voted. And then there were 4 or 5 people from that same Boy Scout troop that said, we don't want the dam removed. So there's a little bit of
Yeah, and those were
funkiness in that Boy
adults,
Scout troop, yeah.
adults versus the kids. I
David.
was
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
impressed that,
Yeah.
that, I think it was Lincoln Green spoke up. It was
Yeah, yeah.
a Very well written letter.
Did we have another hand online? I'm not, you said Paul.
No, you-
Oh, Malcolm.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
Malcolm was-
Yeah, okay. I do just wanted, Jeff, did you wanna respond on the price issue? Looked like you had an idea on how to thread that
I'm,
needle.
no, I don't have an idea. I'm confused about putting a cap on things without putting a number on. them.
Yeah, no, yeah, we have to
Yeah,
think
like,
about that
it's
one.
a lot.
I'll comment a little bit on the budgeting is that both the dam removal and dredging proposals are essentially capital proposals that would have to work their way through the town's capital planning process. And I understand that there's been CPC applications made and that somehow doesn't feel like real capital, but there's kind of, it's sort of just coming out of a slightly different pocket of the same community. And will be competing against other things. For example, we think that quite a bit of historic preservation in this immediate area related to MCI is likely to be chasing CPA funds. So it's going to be competitive from that perspective. The recurring management plan has to compete with other operating budget priorities on an annual basis. And would have to be seen in that context too. So I think it's highly unlikely that we'd see runaway costs in either of these things, because, in the making of budgets, we're running pretty tight at the moment. Things are pretty snug. So I'm less concerned about the idea that somehow this gets away from us. Just because the practical matter of appropriations for that is gonna have it competing with our roads and our parks and everything else.
Malcolm, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I don't agree with Sven, actually, that the state's gonna make us take the dam down at some point. Maybe they will. But I think we do have to take into account the inevitability that the dam will be taken down at some point. Obviously, we don't have crystal balls, but right now the state's overall policy is that the only dams that are being maintained or replaced are those that are in place for flood control.
Yes.
Hydro, not at all. Whatever. I'm not being very articulate. But the dam will go. I don't think it will happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But unless the total environment changes, which I don't think it will, when the dam comes up for state approvals or whatever, we will not get the approvals to retain the dam. So I think we need to look at this is a proposal for a limited period of time.
I have a question about that. I'm just curious, as I don't know the answer to this. One of the reasons the Talbot Dam is coming down is because it's privately owned, correct? And they're willing to remove it.
These are huge liabilities for not.
Yeah, huge liabilities. This dam is owned by the town of Concord. So the state can't come in, as far as I can see, and demand that it's removed as long as it's kept up. I'm not saying, I agree with Malcolm eventually, maybe 100 years, Malcolm, but I think sooner or later, it's very likely that at some point this will come down, but there's no agency that can force a town. I mean, in Massachusetts, towns have a lot of authority, don't they? And can you force a dam to be removed as if it's in good shape?
I don't think if it's in good shape.
That's
You
what
do
I'm
not,
thinking.
in its good shape, you can't force it, but I think, one is sooner or later you have to repair that. like you said.
Yeah, you have to repair it.
You run into that. And the other one is, I just think it's just from a overall political environment at a certain point when you have dams taken downstream.
Sure,
And you see things happening.
absolutely. And the
Then
pressure builds. I
the
completely
pressure
agree
builds,
with that.
And yeah, it's.
Yeah, I agree with you completely,
Yeah.
sir. And I think in that sense, many years from now, it could very well be.
So I think that goes to the outside pressures right? Outside pressure is good.
Yeah.
Without saying what they are.
Yeah,
But I
as
think-
long as, as long as the way the government works, isn't the state can come in and demand that we take our dam out.
Right now.
Ever, unless it's
No, not
falling
right
apart.
now. No,
Oh, you
things can
wanna-
change.
They change the whole constitution.
Don't look at you.
Right, I know, watch out.
Don't get into that.
Wait, are we gonna have that discussion?
No.
So maybe this is obvious, but I think this write-up needs to be pretty clear about how this is gonna be managed.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I've heard a committee, a management committee. Somebody talked about a management company. a
That's
consultant,
also, at least in my notion, you have to get a.
Various
consultant.
town departments. I'm concerned about additional burden on town staff. In this, we haven't considered town staff and
Correct.
maybe the town has to hire people if we're dependent on town staff. So, and who's gonna be on this committee? Those are important details for me and this is all very nice, but how is this?
Right.
How is this going to be managed by whom? And, you know, the governance of this plan.
So,
Yeah.
Paul, what do you have, right, you named sort of the things to avoid, do you have a positive suggestion about what should be in it around that?
Well, I think the idea of, so let's say this is moving forward, so in whose hands is it? It should be some kind of standing committee that probably is appointed for 5 years. I mean, just as
Mhm,
opposed to
probably,
recurring. And that should be participation of various town departments. Is there a consultant involved in this, outside resource? I don't know. I'm just saying it has to detail who are the participants and the stakeholders who are gonna be responsible for this. This doesn't sound like a typical committee. It sounds a little bit almost like the land use, you know, with participation from various departments.
When I first thought about this, I was thinking that similar to the way this task force is constituted, this might, we had actually written this in, I don't know whether it made it to the last version.
Well, I don't know if I put it in Martin Mile, but it's.
But the idea was a subcommittee of the NRC.
Yeah.
So, but looking at the NRC as sort of a lead agency with the responsibility to convene the collaboration with Recreation Commission particularly, and with, maybe somewhat less involvement, but still important involvement from DPW. Because of their responsibilities for specifically maintaining the dam and keeping a handle on that. But the recreation component obviously is to focus on uses, to track the uses, try and understand, is flat water kayaking increasing? Is fishing becoming more popular? How, you know, if boat launches are improved, how much boating is going on? The uses of this area are changing over time, and so recreation would be responsible for the programming and the tracking of the recreational uses, while the natural resources side would be more responsible for the tracking the ecological conditions as we defined it, and asking the NRC to report on that. I think of that as also being aligned with some of the goals that the NRC would hold itself accountable to. So progress on the Warner's Pond Management Plan would be an NRC goal, and that would roll up to usually the sustainability and livability goals that the select board would have.
Yeah, I'm thinking that not just tracking, but the nitty gritty of how these plants gonna be removed, who's gonna manage that, if there's a drawdown, who's gonna do this, is it? Because right now, I don't think that NRC has the staff.
It does not,
do-
it does not.
This
That's
is-
fairly
this-
big,
this-
and
this is-
absolute.
This is
And that
significant
was the
burden.
the
Excuse me?
funding proposal that was in this plan did really assume that pond management consultant was gonna be hired with those types of goals
Consultant.
in mind. Well,
Okay.
yeah, a management company.
Right.
That would
you know,
do the work.
That
not
would
just
actually do the work, not
consult.
just consult.
That's it.
In my proposal, which again may not be accurate, I put $50,000 in for the first year for this. And then an additional 25,000 for actually actions that might take place during that first year. And then I was thinking an ongoing $25,000 for the pond management consulting firm. I talked to one, there's probably others, in fact, I talked to two, one I wasn't too crazy about, the other one I liked pretty well. But that's what I was thinking, Paul, yeah, it would be a pond management consulting firm. And I do think we have to be very careful, I know.
Well, and the staff to manage. them.
Absolutely, checking with Bear Hill, you know, again, it's all volunteers. They're the ones who do it. They bring their concern, they bring their budget concerns. In their case, they're not reporting to the NRC, they're reporting to the select board. So they bring a lot of the things to the select board, but they're the ones who go out and they make the recommendation to the select board for the hiring of the pond management consultant. They have a pond management consultant who does that kind of work. And then they have, as I think Concord has, enormous number of volunteers who do things.
Right.
You
Did you estimate an FTE to manage this?
know. They don't have
Who manages this?
well, right now, I mean, the committee would, at least I'm suggesting it's gonna be the committee who's managing this.
Like, with
Committee.
their contract, how do they do procurement?
I'd have to find out that. I was thinking the same thing. I don't know the details of that, Delia, but I'd have to check.
So they'd be spending town funds.
That's true. They'd probably come to the NRC.
Some staff. Or somebody in town.
Somebody in town somewhere
Approves
must
the
support them, but I don't know who does. At
That's
least
a good
they didn't suggest that they did, but I don't know. I'll have to find out. I'll have to find out.
I think it's an NRC staff has to actually manage.
Yeah, I
this.
mean, for
It's not,
any,
it's not the subcommittee managing it, is it?
No.
The subcommittees manage consultants?
Yeah.
Up to, yeah,
I would
That's-
thought so, but I don't know. No?
Well, we don't have that structure in Concord.
yeah.
We don't have such structure at all in Concord. There's no
No.
committees that
Not
don't
that
manage.
Not that I'm aware of, that are
That's right.
spending town money. No.
But it could get let's figure it out, but it could get approval through.
Anyway, that's the type of thing,
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of
they could
think,
make it a
think this
request.
through.
There would be town staff that would be needed for
Yeah, that's.
committee. work.
Significant project has a significant management laid out.
So I'm gonna assume that sort this detail out.
It has to be worked out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
The most recent example I can think of is when we hired the consultant for MCI planning. The advisory board developed an RFP which town staff issued. And then the advisory board sat down and actually evaluated the RFP responses, preferred, selected the preferred respondent, and then the town staff had to actually execute the contract, because all the contracts are actually have the town manager's signature on them. And then once that happened, then effectively the day-to-day work with that consultant is through the advisory board again. So, I mean, there's similar
So the
structure.
day-to-day is managed by the advisory board, not by itself.
Yeah, there is some administration.
Yeah, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's a good,
This-
it's
this is
actually a
kind of-
good point.
This is important.
It can be
Okay.
done.
I just wanna say, I see Malcolm, I see Jeff, I wanna, if it's okay with both of you, actually. I wanna hear from sort of everyone who had concerns about this, and Malcolm, you had a chance to chime in before, I wanna get back to you, but Liz, you haven't, I wanna hear, if you have, if I may, just. We heard some ideas from Jeff, some from Sven, Malcolm, I wanna come to you as well, do you have the things that you wanna add to this list around how to make this?
Well, so I think one of my things, I think, I'm agreeing with that,
Yeah.
like what I heard answered, I think a lot of, my- I mean, like I said, my big concern was like, I don't want this to be a stopgap to be like, no, we're just gonna drag it there in 5 to 10 years. I feel like it's a lot of the stuff we've talked about kind of makes it like another like true decision point, because,
So
The one
there,
thing I-
language around a true decision, sorry.
Yeah.
yeah, that it's like not just, I don't wanna slide into something.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
but one of the things that Jeff brought up was the metrics, and I think that, I don't know that I know what I think the answer is, but I do think a discussion that we should have as a group is where are the metrics coming from? Is it something that we as a group are deciding? Are we saying, here's some areas that this committee should think about developing metrics in, and we just know there need to be metrics? Like, I don't know what I think about that yet, but I think it's a conversation that
Mhm.
is worth having. I think it's one thing to be like, yep, we need metrics, but I think we need to be very clear about. Like if there are people in the group that like very strong, like I think these are the metrics that we need to track versus like we feel like there's some general buckets, but then the committee can
Mhm.
figure out the details. I think. Probably I feel like we have some general buckets and then a committee can figure out the details, but.
Mhm. Mhm. But it sounds like you want us to be as specific as you can reasonably be without overstepping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like just
Yeah.
some thoughts about what we think are important based on,
Mhm.
I think that's one of the ways we kind of keep some of the knowledge that we've all gained.
Yep.
Is like. The metrics should be around the things that we've flagged as
Mhm.
important or,
Which Jeff started to outline, like water quality,
Yeah.
invasives, yeah.
Versus
Without putting
creation.
something in front, like
Yeah.
I do think the committee should have some say in.
yeah, and I
Working
think
with the
there's probably a
consultant to
bucket
say what's
around.
realistic, like,
There's probably a bucket around recreation metrics
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Like, I think
Mhm.
there's not just environmental metrics.
Mhm.
Sediment quality.
Yeah.
The release of nutrients from the sediment.
Yeah, the
is
water,
a
water
big
quality,
black
phosphorus.
Mhm.
You'll be able to get some measurements from this.
Water quality, temperature, yeah.
Yeah.
Come on.
Taking that metrics as a point in the question of hiring a consultant, just to reiterate the importance of that independent entity to help advise the next committee to capture these broad areas of metrics and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's what success looks like, and water quality, percent change, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And then, public input, whatever that committee sort of adopts it. I'll say, I hope there wouldn't be pushback on this, because I think it's just human nature that the folks who would raise their hand for this committee will love the pond and want to invest their time in retaining the pond. And so there will be a natural instinct to favor the pond, by saying like, no, we're making enough progress, I think things are going, the little pond that could. And there'll be a lack of potentially on the committee sort of honest reflection on that progress. So not out of malice or anything, but just out of the folks' attachment. So I think that independent entity reporting back to the town on that investment, return on investment, will be really important. And again, the pond management company itself will have the same incentive to say, yeah, we should keep doing it. So I think
Right.
that should be an independent entity.
Yeah, yeah. Got it. Malcolm, go ahead.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern about this is that sorry, to call it an adaptive management plan, I do think it's fair to say that most of the obvious and affordable things have already been done to deal with the pond. We may not have done it on a continuous basis, but we've used pesticides, we've done manual harvesting, we've done a lot of things over the years. The options that after all of that time came up was to do something expensive, to dredge, which is not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but I honestly feel that simply repeating what has been done and that's affordable isn't going to get us anywhere. If you're going to do a truly adaptive management plan, you have to do the $1 million on a pump so that you can draw down. You have to dredge the pond. So I cannot get behind this because it's either we're going to spend large amounts of money to do a proper job with an adaptive management plan, or we're going to do a half-assed job and get nowhere, as we already have since 2012. I cannot reconcile the two. Please explain to me how we can.
I've already been through this. I don't know what else to say to you about them. We're gonna try some things. We're gonna see what works and what doesn't.
Been trying.
Well, I know, for example, I don't want to go into all the details, but I know there's new herbicides out there. And
Sorry,
there's new herbicides that are being thought through. They might be looked at. There's actually some biological controls for some of the things. It's the milfoil, if not, but not the fanwort. There's things that we may look at. Drawdown still may actually work with a much simpler methodology than using a big $1 million, which I put in the plan, $1 million edifice. It could be done much more simply. And I'm just saying, I don't want to go into the details of it.
But the expert opinions we have, whether they come. So
Not
how
at,
do
not
you
at the
explain
present,
that?
not at the present level that we're in. Not at the 6-inch drawdown that we can only get right now. 6 inches won't do it. So that's true. You want the 6-inch, I don't want to go back over all these elements, but I think those are possibilities for us to look at, going forward. Again, it certainly seems to be working in other places. I don't see why it couldn't be tried here. I mean, not tried, and I know there's gonna be issues about working out with the state, et cetera.
I mean, I don't know whether anybody else has ever raised this, and I did not know this until I saw the thing that you shared. I didn't know that Bear Hill is actually a
Great Pond, correct.
and the dam has added a marginal amount of water to it. It's added an extra 100 acres. to what
Correct.
We're already 220.
Correct.
So that's marginal in that respect. So I have great difficulty understanding how we can compare Bear Hill with Warner's Pond.
Well, one of the things they're facing is, if you read the report, they're facing fan work, they're facing milfoil, exactly the things we're facing.
Yes, I read it,
So you see that.
but we have an apple and we have an orange.
Yeah, large orange and a small orange, all right?
Anyway, I mean,
There was one herbicide
we
treatment,
don't need.
Listen,
there was one herbicide treatment done in 2011 and was deemed successful. So the question has been, why did that not continue? So that would be the recurring pond management part of it that did not continue. But it was deemed successful. It was one of the first reports I asked to be posted to the task force website. So that's there to read.
So
It does work.
I'll just respond to that. It was deemed by the consultant who performed the treatment to be successful.
Yeah.
When we had that evaluated and looked at it and understood that the herbicides only stay within the pond for 24 hours and they need a much longer than 24
So
hour.
if you do the
Contact
treatment
time. That
midsummer,
we decided it was a waste of money.
but if you do the treatment midsummer and there's not a lot of water going over, you're not gonna have that flow through. So that would
It
be,
is still flushing at a 24-hour rate.
there's like a trickle of water going over the dam during the peak summer or during a drought. That would be a great time to do an herbicide treatment. So you're not gonna have that flow
We can
through.
look at when that was done and that might be something
So
that.
that's exactly.
I
what-
wanna-
that's exactly what-
Want to
I wanna,
dump
Malcolm, I wanna,
herbicides in the pond.
I wanna come back to you for a minute. It sounds like you're looking at the first bullet here, right? I think there's not a version of this recommendation that you can live with, and you've laid that out. And if that's the case, then that's gonna be noted in the report, okay? And and we've committed to that from the beginning, and we'll share some of the rationale that you just named, for why this isn't workable for you. I think for those of you who maybe feel like you're on the fence, all right? I think we're trying to get a list here of what might be workable. I think we have a pretty substantial one. I wanna check in, we're moving towards the period now where it'd be potentially helpful to think about, could we vote on a version of this, right? So I wanna just check, are there things that we're missing, other things that could help bring those of you kind of concerned more around that?
I'd like to list if everyone looked at it and said those are all great, or prioritize these sort of accoutrements that we.
The additional one,
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I'd like to highlight an area of agreement that I think was. The idea about this is to have a rigorous and objective evaluation of are these activities actually working? Are they accomplishing some goals? And if those goals are being accomplished, and acknowledge that, but if after, the treatments or activities are tried and they're not resulting in any forward progress towards the decline of this water body, then I think that it's gotta be incumbent on this group to step forward and say, this isn't really accomplishing what's needed. And it's always been my assumption that that sort of immediately goes back to, well, maybe one of these capital intensive options needs to be considered, or some other option needs to be considered. And so maybe we need to even be saying, we write into the charge of the group that says, if sufficient progress against the stated goals is not being achieved, then this group is supposed to come up with what it recommends as the alternatives, recognizing that there was agreement that the long term, there's not supposed to be a dam there.
Mhm. Mhm. So Mark, this is sort of you making much more concrete your suggestion of much the long term, what it looks like in the medium
Yeah,
term.
I have concerns about removing the dam that go to engineering and the fact that, 50 yards down the pipe, there's a, to my eye, relatively flimsy, I'll use, road abutment and bridge, spend over in public works. Thinking, and I don't want this to become a stormwater management problem.
We just have to build enterprise fund.
Yeah. I mean, and
Right.
to be concrete about that, what I mean is the climate resilience planning aspect of what is going to happen as this whole system has to deal with more extreme events is a concern that I don't think we've spent very much time on, but I think remains present. I understand that an empty impoundment is better in the short run, in the first 16 or 24 hours than a full impoundment, but either way, there's substantial infrastructure, and there's likely to be more important infrastructure very close to downstream from this, and I would expect that we engage with those topics as well. I don't know whether I put it in the charge of this particular group, or whether I leave that as, part of our broader infrastructure concerns that we have as a town, but that's certainly in the back of my mind.
Maybe we shouldn't ask this, but it's a flow through dam, that there's like water in, water out.
Mhm.
Removing the dam doesn't make a difference in terms of the water that's hitting Calm out. Right? I mean, we don't have to go around, right?
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, right now, that it's the dam that's holding back the water,
It's not,
not
it's
the,
holding back the impoundment, but
yeah.
the same amount of water, dam or no dam, the same amount of water will be appearing
But I
at
thought I
Calm.
read somewhere that it does put more pressure on the abutments there.
Yeah,
Somewhere in our
think so.
reports, there was something that said.
But I think the broader point is
You're right.
you'd like some statement around climate resilience planning being at least one of the concerns of this committee, if not explicitly part of its charge. Jeff had requested that we put up some of these ideas, that
I
kind
just
of
have to
no
ask
regrets.
Malcolm to move.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry, I think you can see.
Thank you.
So here they are, or these are the ones that came up, these are just the ones that came up in the recommendations that people had. Right, so,
The last two seem like different flavors. That's everything we're talking about.
yeah, I mean, monitoring is part of what we're talking about, and
The
then. we
monitoring
are
is over
talking-
there.
Right,
It's
yeah,
not
right.
like,
Yeah, the last few bullets are in already, I think.
yeah.
So you're asking us whether we agree, whether
Yeah,
we.
do we want to recommend those?
Yeah.
These will be included.
Well, I look at the Route 2 stormwater management as being an ask. I mean, we have to ask the state to try to deal with that, but.
I think it was an
No.
advocacy piece. There was like an
Yeah,
advocacy.
yes,
piece.
yeah.
Advocate for.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
And I think the water access and improved viewing from Giroux is being taken up by recreation already. We don't need to ask
Mhm.
them for that. Correct. That can come off of our
Okay,
It's
list.
all right,
Used to be.
okay. Or, yeah, okay. Or we could name some, we could put something in there like
I
we
don't think
support it, or
We already did.
we already did.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, okay.
I think, yeah, right, we sent the letters.
Yeah, we did.
Saying
We
that
did.
this task force supported it, so, yeah.
Mhm.
Done.
All right. anything, so that's the list that I pulled out. If we, anything we wanna add? So we're not taking anything off.
Did pretty well.
This is not an add to the list, but maybe back to the bullets here. Again, proposing to the group that none of these investments be made, or these investments be made. Understanding that dam removal is still potential future. You know, like if I don't wanna get 5 or 10 years and say, Jesus, everything's pointing in this direction, except we just built this nice new accessible dock.
But they were in the dam removal proposal too.
Right, but assuming, because they would reach the channel or the
Yeah,
channel
yeah.
would be there. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, same as we've used this language, not to preclude a future
Mhm,
decision.
Sure,
you know?
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
The comma of configuration of comma.
It still
bullet lines
works, it'll just be further in.
Be further out.
Yeah,
We'd have to, so let's say we put it in tomorrow, it would be extended. If the
Or
dam
we
was
we
removed.
talked about the channel alignment.
Or
the
channel
length
comes
of the
close to it, yeah, so either way, it still works.
Mhm. But there should be consideration of the multiple possible futures,
Right.
right, in the design, that's the point. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, Rachel, you've been taking very careful notes there. So do you wanna run us through what we've said, we wanna add into this proposal? And so I'll just say that our default here, is we'll take a look at the recurring management proposal. I wanna take a look at what's in here, right? I don't think this seems like some additions, but not a change. You tell me what.
not very much.
Yeah, so we'll consolidate those. We will look at these in terms of thinking about what needs to be amended or added
Mhm.
to those existing proposals. And then also, other things that may need to go into a report around, including the comments, right? And all that other stuff that I think we heard a long list around, right? Consultations, et cetera. But that would be our kind of where we're at now. So Rachel, do you want to just share with us what the amendments to the existing materials are?
So top is, a definition that someone said, I think it was Vicky, about what the recurring management plan will be. What it really means, an adaptive pond management plan that recurs if it's working. Now, that's not a snappy title, but I wrote it down because I thought, I saw a lot of head nods and it seemed like it captured the sense of the group about what you're talking about when you talk about recurring management plan or an adaptive management plan. So that's something that I would like that would be helpful if the group came around some agreement as to this kind of title. In terms of the elements for consensus, that it's not an open-ended plan. It's time-bound, 5 years with a commitment for evaluation with regular reviews. Metrics and evaluation, measurable objectives, and at least on water quality, ecological diversity, and recreational value. And then like questions about, well, who's gonna develop the metrics? There should be an independent entity to advise on the metrics, and then that needs to be baseline data to measure against, which I think is not a big problem.
I got one problem.
Okay,
And I don't wanna make a big deal, but not to be open-ended is a little bit worrisome in the way it's suggested. I don't know how to say this in a different way. I understand about just running on and on and on. I do like, I think it was Jeff's notion that we should have a major assessment at the 5-year mark and maybe interim assessments. That's perfectly reasonable. I think that makes sense. But I don't want it to rule out, to think that this is gonna be another task force that we just created. But in this case, oh my God, instead of meeting for 2 years, we have to meet for 5 years, I don't want that to be the case. I want this to be thinking that it's trying to come to a solution, and it's gonna be working towards it. If it doesn't work, and it's gonna be checked by all the measurements. I agree with you about setting these things beforehand, but that it may very well continue after that. So in other words, major assessment in 5 years, but I wouldn't say not to be open-ended.
Yeah, those
Okay.
first two things are
Right.
kind of opposite.
and I wrote down like as things were coming.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's my opinion. I know other people may have changed.
You don't need that, you don't need,
I was gonna
you
suggest.
don't need time bound either.
No, not time
You
bound.
just need the,
out.
Yeah.
You need to say that it's gonna be evaluated against criteria.
A series evaluation in 5 years and maybe intro evaluations either every year or every
I
other
think
year.
it should be annual.
I'd say something
Yeah.
like two,
Annual.
only to be,
Instead
to be
of 2
con-
years. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, right, so that is a really good question, so what is the review period?
Well, I think in 5 years, Jeff suggested, and I think you may have already said this, that we would have an outside agency audit what project has, how the project has worked with us or them within those 5 years.
and then 2 years or annual fine, but
Yeah.
sometimes they might try something new and be like,
Right,
it's gonna take
right.
a couple years. But maybe there's an element to capture the intent here of something like only to be continued if metrics are being.
Correct. Oh, I
Right.
completely
Which
agree
is
with
the
that.
whole, if it's working,
Yeah.
And that's down,
and metrics
lower.
evaluate.
yeah. So
But I think, Rachel,
is
it's
it
the first
yearly?
2 lines. If it's working and what the criteria for it's working is this evaluation and the data, so the metrics are what lets us know if it's working.
Is
So
it
it's an adaptive
annual?
management plan that occurs if it's working, and we'll know it's working if it meets the metrics that we're gonna set for
Is
it.
it annual?
Not after the 5 years, I
Not
think
after
prior to the
after
5 years.
But up to the 5 years is it?
There should be an annual check-in. Are we
I
doing?
think you
It
need
doesn't
to
have to be
make-
evaluated by an outside
This
company
doesn't
every
be
year.
an annual thing. The management plan is just a 5 year.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason that we said that this group would be responsible for convening at least annually a stakeholders forum is to make sure that all of the things, the livability, the recreation,
Right.
the
Criteria.
ecology are all working towards the broader set of town goals. And that part is definitely gotta be annual. I think that what we're talking about here is this sort of more technical notion that whether or not the pond is degrading, improving, or staying the same it should be a matter of factual a fact that's related to some data points that this group is specifically charged with collecting and, reporting on over time, and I would say, yeah, annually would make more sense than that, but the evaluation of that would be 5 years, because certain kinds of programs we can easily imagine are cumulative. You do the same thing every year at the same time, you get better results. Over
Like a 5 year goal.
There's where do you
Have
want
I
to be in 5
captured
years?
it?
No,
correctly?
I don't think so.
Tell me what
I
I'm,
don't think so.
what I'm.
I think what you wrote is committee meets annually. I don't think that's right. The committee has to meet. It's gotta meet
No, the
way more
management
than
actions
annually.
are
I think the
annual basis.
whole convening of like DPW, recreation, town manager, NRC has to happen at least yearly to say,
So that's,
are we all doing our part?
That's,
That's not the committee.
That's the community
oh, that's.
stakeholder
not the
engagement.
committee.
Yeah.
That's the- What is
Yeah.
it? What is
That's not
it?
the committee.
Stakeholders.
No, the committee has to meet more often.
Committee's gonna be meeting probably every
But
month.
the stakeholders part of the
The
committee.
committee's got to meet.
No,
Gotta be regularly.
Individuals might,
Manage these
Yeah,
but,
technical
but
factors.
you might also
and
have a
the
joint
goals
meeting
that
with,
they get from the stakeholders.
like the recreation,
For example-
recreation commission, invite the whole.
This would be appointees.
a public meeting.
Yearly, what do we,
The
what do you call
stakeholder
that?
committee.
That's this, yeah, the stakeholder forum on a public forum, it's
That's
written
what I
in.
was gonna say,
yeah.
okay.
But, so those ecological measures, technical measures of pond health, which is one of the basis for that.
Okay,
But so if there's a goal to, increase the availability of, boating on the pond, that might be recreation, might run some programs for that, docks gets built, whatever. That's a separate set of metrics that's also, addressing how well is this pond functioning in the context of meeting community needs, which is different from how healthy is the pond.
Two different.
So that
systems.
stakeholder group is done by Envision Concord, the
Yeah.
committee is
Right.
run by this
Right.
metrics.
got it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like metrics and things that are measured could change,
Yes.
Yes.
be added.
Just a quick point of clarification, Rachel, I think you said that a outside independent entity would advise on the metrics. I think it was that they would do
Audit.
the
That-
measuring. Or
They
the-
would review the measuring and see if the measuring is accurate. Is that what you're thinking, Jeff?
I think that there's statistics involved.
Yeah,
in my
I
knowledge
don't
of, like, what does improvement
look like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And if we say, if it's directional and they come back, we have 0.0001 improvement, it's like, is that worth,
Right.
is that the return, is that a return on our? investment?
Right, that's an
So
interesting question, yeah.
I can't put those numbers out there, but I think, it's study design, we need study design.
Right.
So
And then
it's,
someone to carry out that.
so it's an independent entity. When I said to advise, it's really to evaluate the
Correct.
results.
Success.
No,
To-
Yeah.
So why is that a study design too?
To create the metrics and the objectives, we want water quality, we want dissolved oxygen to improve from this current measured range to this. That would represent improvement. Or that might have like organic material mass or weeks.
Or how
a year
about,
of
how about,
accessibility.
yeah,
You know,
or
the
the
committee
flora,
and the
the-
proposal could
yeah,
come up
the-
with that, but the committee and the consultant, but I think, there needs to be some teeth to it. and
Yeah,
not
I agree.
Sort of a like, yeah, it looks better. I was out there last week. It looked better. Didn't it look better? to
So I
you?
got lost again. You want an independent entity to create the metrics. You also want an independent entity to assess the actual.
I think it was the reporting back, independent entity reporting back to the town on the achievement of the metrics or not, other than the creating the metrics.
Yeah.
So not creating them, that's the committee.
Okay.
I think there's
So then
some
after
method.
5 years, assuming things are going, then it goes to a 2-year check-in.
Mhm.
And then I have in 5 years, if it isn't working, and that's also repeated, if sufficient progress is not made, the committee is charged with.
Reevaluate the
Making
decision.
recommendations.
Yeah,
I'd say looking back on our work.
yeah.
I mean, what are the words you'd want?
Just leave your
Make-
phone number here for
Make
5 years. from
recommendations for
now.
other options, I mean,
Yeah.
or other alternatives, we gotta keep it in there. Just say, you can't keep doing the same thing, maybe after 5 years it isn't working.
Yeah, I
Make
mean,
recommendations.
if we see degradation, that probably means that its usefulness as an open water body for, warm weather activities is degrading, the supposedly, you can assume the community satisfaction with the progress is gonna be down, something needs to be done about it.
Okay. So you also have at least 2 big decision points. One is that if there's a major damage or cost regarding the dam, that's a decision point on removal on whatever. And that then there's another point, where is it? Not sliding, no investment in fish passage at this point. That's also a decision point.
I mean, I think there's 3 decisions, and the
And
third
then
decision point is when-
It's also the,
if there's a not meeting of the metrics.
if there's not meeting in them.
Because you're making, you have to
agree.
agree, you're
Yeah.
doing, all 3 are gonna end with the same result of like, we need
Yeah.
to convene and rethink this through.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful to these kinds of recommendations to really say clearly what is a decision point? And that like things
Yeah.
stop and a decision is made as opposed to like you're concerned about sliding into something without really realizing, right? And then you have sort of the not to exceed kind of price, that concept of not to exceed, and you had some conversation about that, and I didn't get a clear read on exactly.
Can I
What?
can I go back to the
Yeah.
decision point? I think it would be helpful to spell out if it's the committee that's already formed, like just evaluates the decision themselves, or are they convening a larger discussion to talk about it?
So one thing that I did is I started putting another sheet that's more you have a lot of structural issues, really, right? It's just like, what is this committee, who's on it? How do they make decisions? Who does what? What's the procurement? I think there's a lot of pieces to fill in here. So if we can kind of set that aside for a minute.
Sorry, side
Stick-
tonight.
No, it's fine. No way for you to read my mind. So we have this not to exceed question, like that was a conversation point about trying to draw a line of how much are we gonna spend on, I think we're talking about the
That's
management
what that
plan.
means.
And
I guess.
and whether that's a good idea or not a good idea, because you don't really know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess the incremental funding would go through whatever town process to
Right.
approve at the time, right? So
Right.
we're not really in a position
okay.
to put a not to exceed
All right.
price on. it. Maybe that's not.
That'll be
the
enough
right
stopgap, you
control.
think, Jeff?
But try, like any mechanism folks can, I mean, I'd be most concerned about getting to a point where, geez, we've already spent this much money.
Mhm.
Maybe we should just like give it one more shot or give it some cost
Mhm.
of saying, let's
But we'd have to
Let's
go to
keep
the
after it.
CPC to get that money, or we'd have to go to town meeting, and there'd be a whole big public process for that.
Yeah, I guess I
They
mean, you
look
could put in the
at them.
proposal dollars that we got public feedback.
That's if it's
Then we'll
capital,
be
or
at
if it's
550
operational, it's
something.
gonna go through NRC.
And
It's
then,
capital, it's gonna,
Well, and some of
and
these
then
things.
say we
can-
would aim
Yeah,
amount to
Right.
exceed this
We were
cost,
right
because
at the
that's what we
yeah.
budget.
right,
it's like,
Okay, you got
okay,
that one.
that's,
Yeah.
I didn't, no, I didn't get it.
Okay,
Mhm.
so take the budget that we put in the proposal that was
Mhm.
put to the public,
Right.
say, we want this to be the aim,
Right.
right, for what this board should not exceed.
And that's just scenario A, if I remember correctly from the proposal, which
Right,
was just the
okay.
Yeah.
recurring management plan.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have, capturing and sort of keeping what the task force has learned over this long process, and there are a couple ideas about putting things, preserving the website, carrying forward the Concord, Envision Concord criteria, all of the data that you all looked at, all the reports,
Which are in the website.
which are in the website now, and whether it's
Mhm.
preserved in the website or it's preserved somewhere else, that material and all that work should be kept.
Is there any reason it can't be kept going forward?
Sorry, the longer I listen to this, the more concerned I'm getting. Sorry to chime in from the left here. If I listen to what everything is, so I don't know. There's a saying in Germany, if I translate this correctly, if you can't come to a decision or a conclusion, you form a committee. Yeah, so that's what we are doing. And with that, if I listen to how much needs to be done, and I think about what it means for town staff and the different operations in town to support now the 65th or 66th committee in town with all on the web page and all of this and all of that. I don't know how you want to fit this into a below inflation rate guidance from FinCom for the town. I'm just, where are the resources coming from this?
I don't know, Sven, we have committees for a half-acre parcel in town, and this is
Yeah,
a
and that's
50 but we have a
that's not right.
54-acre resource
And I agree,
here.
that's not right.
that
We have to
needs
get less
oversight.
committees, not more
Well,
committees.
But
But
there's
the-
also a management principle that you don't get what you don't measure.
Yeah.
And the
absolutely.
basic principle here is that we didn't measure this,
Mhm.
and so we didn't get anything out of it. And so what we're trying to do here is frame a plan to measure this. And then perform actions to accomplish those results. If it turns out that there are no effective actions to accomplish those results, we were just involved in the discussion about writing in what's going to happen if this fails. So
I'm just concerned about
Yeah.
resources, what does it mean for town
if
staff?
somebody's not measuring it and.
I agree, if it's someone is not measuring it, but I
Yeah.
think
I don't look at this just another committee. I look at this as a management team.
yeah, but I look at it as what
I recall, this is
resources,
different. Should be
what
different.
resources are needed.
True.
And what is the cost of these resources? Beyond just getting a management consultant or whatever. Is every committee in town eats town resources.
Mhm.
And if we as town, and we have this discussion year over year, we want to be more effective and
How do you suggest we implement this adaptive management plan? How is that implemented? If not with
that's what I said, the more I listen to this, the more I think this whole thing is a bad idea and a failure. Sorry, I'm just taking this in, thinking about what it means for people involved, for the operations. And I'm just getting concerned. And it's just, perhaps this is it's cooked up in the second to last meeting of this group, trying to put pieces together from different things, shake it and come with a solution at 11:55 PM. And a lot of these things could have been essential part of one of the subgroups and brought it with complete picture, cost assumptions, and we're just pulling things together in last minute to come to consensus, and that summarizes exactly what I said, and you can bring my comment up again, is we are in the trap of consensus building. We're just putting something together so we can go home and say, we had a consensus, it's off our plate, someone else would take care of it. Sorry, it's a frustration, sorry to get on the soapbox here.
Can we go
To be
back to
fair,
the,
though, this group has been putting this scheme together
Yeah,
for the
but
past
that-
6 months. Now,
Then
but
why
it's
is this
part of it.
structure
They
there?
put this adaptive management plan together and they wrote it and they
Looks different now.
published it to the public only because there are people who have issues with some portions of it. If everybody just said, we love what was written, we would have voted on this an hour ago. We could have moved forward. We're trying to get all of the pieces in that people are concerned about into what has been written and shown to the public. That's the only reason we're adding this list. Otherwise, we could just accept it.
I agree with that. I think this is a refinement that's designed to clarify. Rather than, and I would also submit that if we dredge the pond, we'd still have to manage it. If we remove the dam, there's a period of transition there, which is at least a few years long, over which, you know, you have to worry about what invasives are moving in.
The engineering of the
the
channel.
engineering, so you're swapping capital management for ongoing management.
task force to
And
do?
any one of these plans requires some refinement of how that plan gets implemented, and I think we're talking about how at this point.
Also, Sven, I recognize, you know, committees and their limitations. However, I often have this argument with one of my in-laws, French, who says, if this was France, you know, the directorate says this is what's going to happen and we're gonna follow along, you know, and they're gonna probably know more than the rest of us. But that is, not that they're too philosophical, that is one of the major differences. As you're aware, we're run by committees. We are run by meetings. And in fact, I think it's one of our strengths, even though it really slows us down and can bog us down, as this is doing. I think it's really essential that we take ownership. And in that sense, we are taking ownership of this with a management, watershed management plan, committee. One thing I would, I know I'm always harping, it's like going to, it's like on a pilgrimage or something. Bear Hill Pond has a yearly pond in lake water quality plant survey that they put out. And they have everything, and they have all the things we've just talked about. They have their, I wish you could only show this, I guess you can't.
So why is this coming now?
Oh, we've been
No,
talking
they've been
about
looking at
this
it.
for 6 months. We've been talking about this.
In the
They
group?
studied.
No, here, we brought this up, but we didn't show you the Bear Hill.
Show it, yeah.
No, we didn't show it because there are other things on the agenda. And frankly, the big battle that was going on was, are we gonna dredge or are we gonna remove the dam? And, you know, our group is sort of, not pulled back,
Under the
but
radar.
yeah, a little bit under the radar. But, I don't know, Jeff, there are things in here, if you look at their Bear Hill management plan, that you might in fact, exactly, right?
read it.
Yeah, you can see it. They have the red lines where they're not making their goals, et cetera. They have their oxygen. From what I can understand, it's their pond management consultant group,
Okay.
who I think you know the people. Who is it? Wendy. ARC, yeah, is that the organization? ARC does this for them. They present this every year, this very elaborate plan to their natural resources commission to show them what they're doing, what they need. That's how I understand it.
Now, I went back to our task force charge here, just what are we supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
So we're supposed to be making a recommendation to NRC on a course of action to improve the ecological health and recreational capacity. We don't have to get into detail exactly how this is gonna get done. I mean, the recommendation could be to form.
Have measurements, have the measurements that are
to
suggested.
Detail this.
Yeah,
So, I mean, our work here doesn't have to,
we don't have to tell you exactly how much dissolved oxygen.
because we're gonna have to vote on a motion at some point, and
Yeah.
we need a motion that's.
Soon would be good.
that-
Yeah, like.
And we need a motion that we can vote on.
Now would be good.
I mean, it doesn't have to have every
You've seen all
detail,
this
so
already?
We don't know.
let's elevate the.
Get the
direction.
We distributed
The
that.
narrative.
I thought we
Okay.
distributed the burial report at some point. but-
Yeah, we might have, I don't even know, I don't know.
So, I do think we need to move towards a vote,
Mhm.
On what?
on, well, that's a good
Framework.
question.
Yeah.
It's a framework, right? It's what are we going to write up in this recommendation? And, we have right now the proposal, right, that was put to the public. We have the supplemental stuff that was submitted in the survey. We have the results of this conversation. I think we're hearing some question now about, should we put all of these details in? Should we name these details? But, suggest that this is, some of them are firmer than others. We can kind of be firmer on some pieces than others, like yes, metrics, yes, defined timeline, yes, these decision points. Yes, certain qualities that we want this to have, and here are sort of ideas around how to do that. That could be the nature of our recommendation. But we have the material to put in there that we've heard today. It's a question of some of the verbiage, how firm we want to be. So, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, let's put the ideas that came out today. There's some things we heard from you that are very firm and clear. If this is gonna get the support, right? The clear metrics, the clear decision points,
Yeah.
right? The goals, right? The multi, department group,
I think
right?
that was already in your
Right.
thing.
Some of them are more flexible and we can specify, which is which in our report, but I do think we need to move towards clarity. So I would now maybe turn it over to our co-chairs to.
Thank you.
I will just note, we have a decision rule here as a group. Yeah, Jeff, you want to chime in before we do this? Go ahead.
Yeah, if you could talk through our process before the next meeting, like,
Yes, yes,
like I've got some
Yeah.
written stuff here which doesn't differ from this, but
okay,
maybe in terms of not.
Great.
So my feeling that things weren't missed, will give you an opportunity to look at a draft that you have.
great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Review that,
Yes.
provide
Yes.
comments without us all
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
get, okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
Please.
So you'll clarify that later. I just want to make one other point. This is, it's not tangential at all, but it's not on these slides. And I'd really like this group, the task force, in our document to thank the town staff for their time with us and say without equivocation that the town staff have worked professionally, brought their neutral expertise to the group to support us,
Mhm.
to advance our decision-making
Mhm.
as we've all done it. We've had disagreements on this group now and again. I think we've worked through them. But the town staff have always carried out their role of providing information, being fair players throughout. I think it's really regrettable that members of the public are questioning town staff's integrity and frankly attacking town staff. And I think if we want to attract and retain talented town staff, which we all benefit from here, we have to say that that's unacceptable. Unequivocally.
Absolutely.
So do you want to make a motion for that? And is that something we should vote on, or do you have, or just
I
put
think
it into,
should be-
just put it
I
in,
think
yeah,
we should have, we have preface.
yeah, absolutely.
Information that
Yeah.
comes to capturing things we've
Sure.
learned.
I like that.
Stating like, here's where we have points of agreement. You guys have the
And it's a
expertise.
statement
Here's where
from
we had
the
a large
task
group.
That's a- Jeff, I support that.
Up top.
I support that.
I think.
That
I-
is something I think is
I
really
think-
important.
if we want to put it in the recommendation as a statement from the task force, then it's probably helpful for you to indicate that you're all okay with that, whether it's a vote, you know what I mean? Because it can be framed in a way of like, it's a statement.
Well, why don't you do
Task-
the pref, that's what Jeff's suggesting, do the preface and then we can vote.
So send it around.
I think it sounds great. I think that sounds excellent.
I mean, I certainly agree with that as a concept and do appreciate the support that we get from town staff. And I think one of the things that's unusual about this particular group is the amount of resources, including the resources provided to support the use of CBI as a facilitator, has actually contributed to the quality of the work. And that's very important to recognize because it's unusual for the town to make this level of investment in a task force. A lot of times it is nothing, I say nothing more than, but it is a group of citizens trying to figure it out on their own, and that leads to a lot more sort of, feeling around in the dark. And this has been albeit a lengthy process, I think it has been focused, and I think it has been on a trajectory that was going to lead us to a decision point in an issue that was very challenging to get to. So I think that I would add that to what Jeff has already said.
So in terms of moving forward toward like a vote.
Let me, I need to lay out the
framework or something?
process.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so this is what, we would suggest as the pathway forward. We want to get clarity on where we are, on this framework, right, that we've developed and been talking about. Not just today, right, but we had the proposal that went to the public that has now been further discussed with additions to it, to make it hopefully more broadly acceptable. We are going to vote on that now. If it is deemed sufficient approval, for us to move forward, CBI will write this up. Our process is going to be as just authentic to what we heard, and the areas of agreement that we heard clearly articulated. This meeting, that we're also in the original proposal, right? And in the other documentation that we've seen from members. As part of that, if folks want to, I know you prepared a list, Jeff, right, of items that kind of maybe clarifies some of the issues that you brought that, seem to have been adopted or acceptable. Please send that. We can use that to inform our writing, just as we'll look at all the other writing, obviously. Yes, send it to us and we can incorporate that as needed. Yeah, you have something you want to say on this or, yeah, okay.
Yeah, are you suggesting we're gonna take a vote?
We are gonna take a vote in a minute. I'm laying out the process of what's gonna happen, right?
Right, we need,
After this.
somebody
vote.
has to construct the motion.
So
Right.
can I just say something first? So.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So what I see happening right now is that we are going to vote on, do we want recurring fund management to be the path forward? Okay, so that is the vote. Do we vote? We're voting on the proposal, okay? Then it's gonna be written up by CBI. You're gonna send it to us, I'm
Yep.
assuming before the
Yes.
meeting so that we can all go
Yes.
through it
Yes,
and comment back to you,
Mhm.
whatever. And then we vote on the written proposal at the next meeting.
correct.
So the motion will just be whatever we call it, the adaptive management plan, with nothing under that, no details, nothing. Okay,
That's right.
I'm just asking.
Yes.
Right. And I think there's a little bit of an assumption you're gonna have to make in voting for that the elements that have been discussed that seem to be have broad support in this group are going to be what is written up, right? But you will have a chance to vote on that written document at the next meeting.
Right.
But I also think what you're voting for tonight is basically the written proposal that we presented to the public, plus a few minor changes. So
As the
Is-
framework.
as the
As a
framework,
That's what we mean by framework, is kind of the broad view with another vote.
And to that have inclusion of also the metrics, measuring success, goals.
How about
that will be the written
That didn't written, it's not part of
So I think we need to
Right.
lay out
Okay.
some I would imagine, for people who had concerns with the original recurring management proposal, that we need to specify some of the elements that are going to be in the additional written draft that will be strengthened, right, in some capacity.
Right.
I think, to get people to.
How about slight, I know it's slightly different what we just said, let me try this. How about if we vote to charge you to write up that we're gonna give you a vote to write up a recurring management plan that picks up all the elements, and as many of the elements as you heard tonight,
Mhm.
into that plan with a final sign off for us at the next meeting. But it would give you a good sense, if enough of us say, yeah, we want you to write it up. Now, we haven't seen the final draft, but we know, for example, with the points you've made, Sven's made, we're asking you to try to amalgamate all that into the plan. So our vote is to say, yes, we're voting for a recurring management plan that consolidates what you heard from the various constituents or various committee members tonight. That would be the vote.
Yeah, well, with one little, that is that recurring management plan is a recommendation from the task force to the NRC.
Yes,
That-
but
Yeah.
that's right, yeah.
That is
Oh,
our
yes, yes.
recommendation.
As our-
But it hasn't been, we haven't seen it, the elements yet.
Yeah.
How many bubbles do we have to fill in? We kind of had a yes, no, and live with. That's some
Yes.
language you've used in the
Yes.
past. I feel much more comfortable with a live with.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
I'm trying to relate a vote tonight with a vote at our next meeting.
Mhm.
And so I endorse this concept of looking at a piece of paper and then voting in early June. I frankly don't know why we need to vote at this point, but if there's a live with, you know,
You'd
if
like to
it's a
go
yes,
live
no,
with.
yes, no, let's get the document to look at. Yes, let's look at the
I think
document
the
because we've
vote
talked it
is-
through tonight, but I don't
we're-
want to
they're
get
gonna write up
in
a
2 weeks and
report,
say, what do you
yeah.
mean? You can
They're
only
gonna-
live with, you voted
I think the
yes.
vote is to say, we're going to write up an adaptive pond management plan.
Yeah.
We're not gonna write up a dredging plan that has some management to it. We're not gonna write up a dam removal plan that has
They're
some.
gonna pursue
stuff.
what we discussed
The
tonight.
They are going
the
to
vote is
write
the
up
task force is
this for
recommending
us to finalize.
To
adaptive management plan
That's
for the
right.
NRC.
And
That's a live with.
It's really common in task forces to choose a direction and then create a final report.
Mhm.
So what we've had in front of us is drafts or versions. And so the last meeting is typically adopting a final report when, if you read the draft report, you know what it says. So.
Right, at the task force we did on 2229, we voted on the recommendation to ask this, recommend the select board to move forward on towards acquisition. But then we wrote up a separate report that we approved
Right,
separately.
right.
Yeah.
So it was a simple
Same thing.
motion
Yeah,
Same thing.
same
that
idea.
this is the same thing we're trying to do here.
I just wanna add though, I wanna make sure what you write up is clear and not, to Sven's point, a watered down version. Like, we all agree, we're gonna recommend an adaptive management plan, but it could be dredging later, but it could also be dam removal, and if it doesn't work, we're gonna, like, I want it to be clear of what we're recommending, so this committee is like, I get it, what we're supposed to be doing here.
Mhm.
It's not like, oh God, they just went through a year and a half and they're not really telling us what we're supposed to do here.
I would think,
And that's the second vote. The first vote is.
No, I know, but I want, when they're writing it up, I wanna,
You're-
I wanna send them
you're
off on
asking
to,
them to-
please
yeah,
write it
I
up
agree,
as a
yeah.
clear
So
direction to this
I do think
committee.
there's an important distinction here, and Keith, I wanna hear you as well. One of the concerns we had is what if a member can't be at the next meeting, right? We would like Paul can't be at the next meeting. It'd be very nice to have a actual endorsement or vote from those members, for the actual recommendation of the NRC, rather than just
Yeah,
CBI should go
sure.
write something up.
Sure.
Right,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't know, Keith, potentially, we hope you can come, right? Might not be available on June 12th, which is the date that got the most votes. That's another,
But he could
individual.
vote.
He could
without
still
being
vote,
there.
yes,
Yeah.
without being
You
there.
know, Paul is
right?
the only
I
one.
think you need a motion to ask them to write it up. You need a motion to make the recommendation.
Yes, that's, yes,
Right,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
So I mean, if we can do it, if folks are comfortable, could we do a vote that we are going to recommend to the NRC a adaptive dynamic management plan?
That
Or you can
recurs
see
if
what was
it's working.
written, what people said, right? That incorporates the concepts that were discussed during today's meeting.
I think that's.
Can somebody write that down and
They have it.
repeat so we know exactly?
Yeah, no, I missed what was just said. I've been writing.
Say it
down.
again.
We were going to, what are we calling this? Adaptive management?
Yeah.
Called adaptive management.
It's
Okay.
recorded.
Okay.
The
But
meeting.
I'm gonna mention for the adaptive.
We are voting to recommend a adaptive management plan that incorporates the ideas and concepts that were verbally discussed during today's meeting,
Based on what was
based on
presented to the.
Based on the
public.
recurring management plan that was originally.
it was based on the
Right.
recurring management plan that was originally
It needs to refer to the document.
Yeah.
proposed.
Document.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
first.
it does.
yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
here's the motion as I have it. We're going to, we're looking for a motion to recommend to the NRC, to recommend writing up an adaptive management plan that incorporates the ideas and suggestions and amendments presented to that plan at this meeting, and then to be presented to the NRC. Is that correct?
Recommended to the NRC.
Recommended to the NRC.
It's our recommendation. to the-
Yeah.
Will we have a live with option?
Yes,
Yeah.
so you can
Okay,
see on the screen there. So first of all,
I got it, thanks.
our decision rule, right, we're aiming for overwhelming agreement, right, although we will report whatever we get.
Right.
Regardless, right, and then you can abstain, and that means you do not count in the final tally, one way or another. So your options here are endorse or support, can live with, cannot live with, or abstain.
Abstain should be reported.
Abstain is reported, Yes,
So,
Just won't be
so
counted.
to
it won't
be,
be counted.
to be clear though,
It's
endorse
will
or
be counted.
support or can live with will be considered yay votes.
Yes,
And cannot live with or out and out, no votes will be no votes and abstention.
so,
Okay.
yeah,
Can somebody repeat the motion again? I want to make sure that we record for posterity in minutes and recording.
Well, yeah.
exactly what we're voting.
Why is
You have it?
abstain, sorry,
I
why
have
is
pretty
abstain not
close.
counted?
So correct me if
so
I'm.
abstain, basically, let's say we're aiming for 75%. Okay, and we have 8 out of 10 people who say they can at least live with it, right? There are 2 people who can't live with it and 1 person abstains. That meets the 75% threshold. If that abstained person, that 11th person votes cannot live with, then that would be 8 out of 11, right? We will report everyone's vote, right? So if you abstain, that will be reported, but in terms of reaching the 75% threshold, it will not go either for or against meeting that threshold. That's the purpose of having the abstain vote. You can decide if you want to do it or not.
So, Bill, this is what I wrote down.
Right.
We are voting to recommend to the NRC an adaptive management plan that incorporates the ideas and suggestions that were discussed during today's meeting based on the recurring management plan proposal that was presented.
That's it.
That's the one.
What would happen if we don't reach majority?
So if we don't reach majority, if we don't reach the 75%, we're gonna just say, this was our goal to get overwhelming agreement. We did not reach it. Here is what we had, and here is what, the people who did not vote for it, their concerns were, right? And so we do not have overwhelming agreement on a recommendation.
But that doesn't mean we don't have a majority. I know we did not vote on the 75%. We did not agree that that's what we were gonna be bound by in this committee. So I just wanna, it is a goal, which is a lovely goal, but it is not what we're bound by. So if it's 51%, it's still majority,
goal, but
which is
yeah.
what
You need a
all of
majority.
Concord
You need a
goes by.
majority.
The majority.
It's still a majority. Yeah, you have to have a majority. You don't need an overwhelming.
But I still struggle is the 75% vote is on the final verdict, not today.
Yeah, you could conceivably, if we made changes and you wanted to change your vote, you could do
Yeah,
that.
sure you could.
Because today we are only authorizing you to make a write-up.
No,
And
we're
to go
making a
into
recommendation.
particular-
We're making a recommendation to the NRC.
But in the recommendation, I want to see the wording for this.
Yes.
But haven't seen it, we're just saying it's in there.
Well,
So I can only make a vote when I see the wording.
Yeah.
That's right.
But
There'll be
it's what
another
it's saying.
vote.
But what we're saying now is we're recommending that we want to proceed with the adaptive
Management.
This is
management
directionally
plan.
what we're doing.
Okay,
Not
but the
dredging
actual,
or damming.
yes,
Right.
but the versus those two, but the actual specifics and the details will be in the written document
And
that
we
you
can
will
vote on
vote
that.
on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Separately, right?
You can vote
And that
against
is
it.
the final count
Right,
Yeah.
right.
for the 75%.
Right.
Or is today the final count?
There's no
for
75%. That's
Well,
not.
The
Why are we
recommendation
bringing
is
this up
based
as a
on
75%?
tonight's.
He said he wants overwhelming,
We're
overwhelming.
searching for
majority.
We would
overwhelming.
like overwhelming, and Paul's not gonna be here. It'd be very nice.
The recommend,
Yeah,
just
Yeah, but we
so-
have to be clear when are we counting the 75%?
Consensus.
You never.
Don't worry about me.
5%, yeah.
I think.
but we're recommending on the vote, the recommendation to the NRC tonight.
Correct.
That's right. That's all we're voting on.
Okay, and then, but that doesn't change, that,
Right.
then you have to deal with the details of the report. That vote is a separate,
Yes.
For me, they're one and the same, sorry.
they're different.
We are making a decision today that this task force's choice is to move forward with an adaptive management plan.
Correct.
With all of
No.
these, or not with these?
No, it
Not
says-
necessarily
in
with.
the-
It says with every-
That's my problem.
It
The
has-
intent
in the
will
vote,
be,
It has those.
As discussed and modified tonight.
That's right.
That's what.
And we are all
Absolutely.
have the same understanding of what
Rachel,
is
why
there.
don't you read the motion, the
I think
proposed
it's, I
motion
think it's a
again?
little weird to vote when we don't have a thing. I think
I think.
the
we-
vote should
yeah.
be, we empower, request CBI to capture everything we've written tonight, spirit of the meeting. To,
So then Paul will not
Enable
get to
the
vote
final
on this draft.
Then you're not voting on a recommendation, you're voting on what CBI should do.
I need the wording of the final recommendation.
Okay,
I think like town meeting, you don't vote.
Can we
without
try
a
the
warrant.
vote and
Yeah,
get
well-
55%?
So-
Let's do whatever we want.
Whatever you want.
yeah, so what I'm gonna suggest is we ask Rachel to read back the motion and listen carefully. And then if somebody's inclined, they should say that they move that motion. And then we should have any further discussion and a vote on that motion, and then we'll at least be partly there.
That's right.
Motion moved second, and then we can
Yes,
discuss it.
that's
Yeah.
right.
So what Bill said is we are voting to recommend to the NRC an adaptive management plan that incorporates the ideas and suggestions that were discussed during today's meeting based on the recurring management plan proposal that was presented.
I move that
I second.
motion.
Discussion?
Just to clarify, we haven't had, there's nothing I can think of there that we had any major disagreements on, correct?
No.
There's no like, okay, just want to make sure I didn't forget something somehow, like essentially everything that we've discussed as add-ons, we've all been in agreement on, as like
I
Liquid.
think so.
Didn't you, Vicky, didn't you say you don't want to have it open with multiple options 5 years down the road? And that sounds like you didn't make a decision. Didn't you just say that 10 minutes ago?
Well, I said, as long as it says adaptive management plan that recurs if it's working, we have the metrics and we have the decision points.
Yeah, but we down there have that the last item is that it has multiple futures.
The climate resilience is part of the
Okay.
charge.
Yeah.
And that it
Okay.
recognizes multiple features.
Yeah.
For the climate.
Yeah, for
So
climate.
we are not recognizing that there might be 5 years down the road a potential decision to do for something else.
Oh, it does,
Yeah,
yeah.
we had
It
three
does.
decision points, we had
The
three decision
decision
points.
Three times, yeah.
Okay, then that's you on that page.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
the decision points for you, yeah, yeah. Okay, we have a second discussion.
We had a second right there.
Okay,
Further discussion.
Call for a vote?
And are we voting with
Starting.
these, the options on the screen? Yeah,
okay. So
Okay,
everybody-
so should we go through and should I call everyone's name then?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll go back. Vicky,
Endorse.
Paul,
Yes, was it endorsed?
You could pick one.
endorse.
Number one.
Okay. Malcolm,
Nay.
Well,
Which
what
one
does
was
that mean?
I do not, I cannot imagine what you're
Cannot live with,
representing.
okay.
Okay. Jeff,
I abstain. I want to vote on the actual
Okay.
document. that we're-
okay. Me, I endorse. Christine DeNaro. Keith Hannon,
endorse support.
Mark Howell,
Endorse.
Bill Kameza,
I endorse.
Liz Morrison Howe,
And Liquid.
David Owen,
Endorse.
Sven Weber.
I need a final voting. I abstain.
Okay,
So what's the tally?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are either endorse or can live with.
All right.
And 2 abstentions and 1 cannot live with. Is that enough, right?
That's what
Normally
I'm
that would be
Eight
the
to
proper
three.
committee
Seven.
vote. They're either
Nine,
yeas,
eight, yeah.
nays or abstains.
So that would normally be reported as 8 yes, 1 no, and 2 abstentions.
Mhm.
Sorry, yes.
8 to 1.
Okay,
That sounds good.
so we have our task in front of us. The next steps, right, as discussed, we're gonna compile this, write it up. We're gonna share it back to you. We, before this meeting, set kind of presumed deadline for ourselves of May 29th to have a draft back to you. We are going to invite comments, and the idea is we give you a week to share your comments by June 5th. And then we'd send those comments out to the group, right? So everyone can see each other's comments and you can note and take, see, are there things here that actually are in conflict? What ideas do I have to try to bridge that gap before the meeting?
I had to ask you a question. Does that violate open meeting law?
We can post it to the website.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, what we're thinking of doing is like maybe a form that you fill out instead of like a red line on the document. I don't, we'll.
We'll
sort
work
through
it out.
this.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll sort
that's
through
fine.
this, but
That's fine.
whatever comments you make will be public,
Mhm.
right? To be clear, right? That's necessary. And then the final meeting, the date that was the winner was June 12th.
Okay.
We won't have Paul. We hope Keith can make it. If Keith can't make it, we'll find a way to kind of get clarity on your perspective and any red lines you might have before the meeting. Maybe you can call in for a vote, you know, we'll see what's possible, but we'll be in touch on that. And that will be, you know, the vote on the final draft, the final vote.
June 12th is it.
June 12th was the winner. Yeah, the clear winner.
Someone should bring a cake.
Yeah.
So we should open this up to the public now then. right?
Yeah, I
Well,
do
let
just
me
want to
just say
say there were,
Before we
Yeah.
do that,
yeah,
I just want to say, I'm gonna miss the final vote, but you should congratulate yourselves on getting to this point. No, it hasn't been easy and I frankly, I didn't know if we could ever get to this point. And I know it's not pleasing to everybody, but you know, the task force did its job. And I think I personally have enjoyed working on this because the differences of opinion is what this town was all about. And it came alive here. So
Yeah,
pat yourselves on the back and thank you.
that's good. I agree with that too.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you,
yeah,
Paul.
thank you, Paul, and thanks for, yeah, all your
For your- you
contributions,
should be
your
a select
thoughtfulness.
Yeah, you should.
I could run for selection. It's crazy.
Been a really important
Yeah.
course
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
of groundedness
Yeah,
and thoughtfulness.
rational voice in
Yeah.
the storm.
So should we open it up to the public now for?
We do have just the one agenda item of the task force member
Oh,
topics of
right.
interest that
Yeah.
we wanted to make sure was
Oh,
on the
yeah.
agenda.
Can I say that I saw them out of the pond 2 days, they were out of the pond, 3 days. I
This is
didn't-
well, the first-
bathymetric.
So the 2 days of actual survey and then so we're Monday, they started just putting setting control for the surveyor. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, they were doing the bathymetric survey and the sediment. survey.
I would object, one of the guys was fishing.
No, it's a line. It's a.
Oh, yeah,
There's
that
gotta be a
was a
line.
line. He was fishing. There was a lure. I was watching that lure go
That's
out.
what mariners do. How many knots in a row?
How did it go?
I don't know how to
So
fish
we
him.
did talk to them today and they said it was already weedy.
Yeah.
So they did have, you know, just was a little slower than it would have been a month or so ago. But they felt like they got good data and we should have something in the next week or two.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
And that'll get sent around to the.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Any-
I just
anything else?
wanted to mention quickly that, the MCI process is continuing. Hopefully, I know a lot of you got involved in the first public outreach, which, you know, happened to happen at Giroux Park Pavilion because it was a beautiful day. And that was so successful and well received that it's going to happen there again. That's gonna be next week on the 28th. And for people that can't make, hopefully, I think both. What, the afternoon session will be at Giroux and then the, evening session will be at the townhouse. And, if you can't make it on the 28th, there is a virtual presentation on the 29th for an hour, and, agency has been very good about having their interactive tools be available for even those people that do virtually, but, you know, show up in person, it's a good opportunity. It is very informative to start considering the options, the massing, the various, opportunities that there are in there, and so closely related, so I encourage you to participate and anybody you know to participate.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I just want to take an opportunity to correct some additional misinformation that was submitted to the task force public comment portal.
Okay.
So there was a claim that the estimated dredging costs that I presented to the CPC were $69,000 per cubic yard. And that the estimated dredging costs presented in the ALTS analysis were $215,000 per cubic yard. The cost actually for the CPC estimate was $65 per yard. And the costs in the ALTS analysis, which are in the table, 4.3 clearly states that they're $60 per yard. So I'm not sure where those numbers came from, but they're incorrect.
Good.
There was a fee, an ask about why the fee for the, Warner's Pond preliminary dam removal design is $215,000, which is high. And the reason for that is because we had a number of additional tasks that are above and beyond, typical dam removal. So we asked for sediment transport modeling. They did drawdown analysis, side channel analysis,
That's right.
preliminary North Field capacity analysis, and preliminary fish passage evaluation. Those are all paid for out of that.
That's right.
So those costs totaled $80,000, which brought the dam removal design cost down to around 140, which
Yeah.
is similar. And then the last thing is that the commenter noted that the Talbot Mills dam removal design costs were quoted by Joe Gould at DER, Division of Ecological Restoration, to be between $100,000 and $120,000. I have costs from the design engineer, that the conceptual design was $75,000, and the preliminary and final design and permitting costs were $300,000. So
Yeah.
just clarifying
Thank you.
numbers.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, these questions have been followed up with complaints
Yeah.
to town leadership, to the Attorney General's office. And, I think each of us should speak up to people we know to say that's completely ridiculous and just egregious. I think it's horrible.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I would say too, there have been personal insults raised against town staff by people, which is wholly inappropriate. None of you have done that. But I think as many of the community members who have raised those points are known to individuals here, I would hope that those individuals have corrected them and asked them not to do it again.
Anything else? Can we move to public comments now?
Yes, we can.
All right, are there public who want to speak?
Name our ground rules, just to.
Yeah, the ground rules are as always, please keep it to 2 minutes. We're gonna timing you on this. Like once more, be respectful about what you're saying and no public attacks. Thank you. All right, where are we? Who's first? And identify yourself, please.
It'll have to be somebody on Zoom since nobody in the public is here on this rainy night.
Are there any hands up?
Any raised hands?
See anybody?
We either bore them to death or
And
they're.
about time. That's right.
3-hour meeting will
It's a
do it.
Warner's Pond miracle.
So I guess the meeting's adjourned?
Meeting is adjourned.
And,
Good work tonight.